in a town where whispers roam. A wolf-turned man found a place called home. Sunlight streams through the window panes. A cozy bookstore where magic reigns. Pages turn with every heart's desire, filling the air with tales that inspire. By day it's quiet, the world feels still, but as dusk falls, it's time for the thrill. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. He weaves the stories of distant lands, with creatures that play in the palm of his hands. The whispers of legends fill the room. From dragons to dreamers, the shadows bloom. In the laughter we forget our fears, sharing our hopes, the dreams of our years. The flicker of candles, the warm glow inside. In the embrace of tales, we let love guide. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. We dive into
Hello everyone, it's Thursday. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. And what is a marketus? I've never seen that one before. Yeah, it's Thursday. I actually have a cat on the bed, so the camera has a cat on it. Hey, Firefly. Good evening. Need to fix the camera. The fluffball's a little off-center. That doesn't quite match my window either. Ooh, cookies. I haven't done cutouts for a while. Of course, last time I did cutouts, I was using a bone-shaped cookie cutter because I was just having that kind of mood. Okay, why is the other music not playing? Okay, what is the maractus? Other than being something cactus-based anyway. But yeah, I'm going to see how much more of this book I can get done tonight. Because I really want to make sure I get the book finished by the end of the year. And there's only 4 chapters left. Oh, now the background music's playing. Yeah. I will try to get at least 3 chapters of it tonight. That'll only leave 1 for the end of the year. Considering the year ends in 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks, actually. Would have been 2 weeks yesterday. Yeah. I'm really gonna have to get this book read. Because I don't think I'm gonna be streaming next week. Because I have to drive to pick up relatives to bring them up here so they can be here for Christmas, and probably drive them back after Christmas. So I probably won't be here most of the week next week. I will have my Christmas Eve stream going, which is a 6 or 7 hour long playlist I've got on YouTube that I'll just be piping out as a live stream. So it'll have Christmas stories, and added 4 more stories to it this year. So it should be pretty good. I think I've added more stories to it every year. I started doing it 3 years ago, and I just keep adding on. So it'll be Christmas stories, just so you can have some background noise during the holidays. But anyway, we need to get over to the book. And for some reason, my ads got switched up, so it's only giving me a 30-minute without pre-roll. But if you're already here, I guess you don't have to worry about the pre-roll. But I will try to keep an eye on the ads. I was trying to make sure I could figure out how to turn them off for next week. So, getting into the book. Feel free to settle back and relax and enjoy the 200-year-old story. Chapter 29. The effect produced by the scene just described upon the minds of the multitude was magical. It seemed a confirmation, strong as proofs of Holy Writ, of all that had been urged against the Queen, and alienated from her side even those who had remained neutral. "I really could not have believed it possible," said the Duke of Essex, as he retired slowly from the court. "Thinking as I think, and as I am very confident everyone else must think," said Lord Gustavus, "she seems to have lost all sense even of common decency." "What do you have to say to this, Sir Ambrose?" asked Dr. Hardman triumphantly. "Nothing," replied Sir Ambrose, sighing. "Then the case is hopeless," said the Duke of Essex, "for I know Sir Ambrose so well that I am certain if a single word could be said in the Queen's behalf, he would not remain silent." "Your Grace judges me too favorably," returned Sir Ambrose, "for there is, on the contrary, much to be said for the Queen, if I had been disposed to say it. You see, the story of her wishing to marry Ferdinand was evidently false, for she desired him in plain terms to quit the kingdom." "A mere blind," cried Lord Gustavus, who felt he had now gone too far to recede. "An absolute farce, and I am only astonished a man of your penetration, Sir Ambrose, could have been deceived by it." "It has long been the proudest boast of the English law," said Sir Ambrose, "that everyone is presumed innocent until he is proven guilty, and I confess I do not see why the Queen should alone be made an exception to the rule." Lord Gustavus made no reply, and the party proceeded to their several homes. The following day was appointed for the trial of Lord Edmund, and the court was, if possible, yet more crowded than before, for the singular termination of Prince Ferdinand's trial had created the most intense anxiety upon the part of the mob to know what would be the result of that of Lord Edmund. It has been already stated that he was the idol of the people, and now thousands of human voices shouted his praises to the sky and heaped curses and execrations upon his enemies. The tumult, however, was hushed to breathless expectation when it was announced that the officers of justice were gone in search of the prisoner, and innumerable human beings stood craning their necks over the lane made for his approach through the crowd, all eager to catch the first glimpse of him. But what language can express their disappointment and surprise when they saw the officers return, pale and trembling, fear painted upon their countenances, and their teeth chattering in their heads? "He is gone!" they cried. "The prison door was locked and the windows fast, but he is gone, and doubtless some evil spirit has carried him off." Great was the consternation excised by this unexpected news. Everyone rushed to the prison, and each in turn was struck with horror on finding it exactly as the state of officers had described. "It is a mummy that has done this," said the people, whispering amongst themselves. "Some horrible event certainly hangs over us, and it is in vain to attempt to resist our destiny. All is supernatural, and we are merely blind instruments in the hand of fate." The disappearance of Lord Edmund had, however, nothing supernatural in it, and indeed was effected by very simple means and by mere mortal agents. The agitation of his mind after his interview with Cheops became excessive, and every hour seemed stretched to an unnatural length as he anxiously awaited Father Morris's return. But the monk came not. Lord Edmund's impatience increased every instant, till it became absolute agony, yet still he was alone. He paced his chamber with uncertain steps, his brain burning with incipient madness, till no longer knowing what he did, he dashed his head against the walls, and tore off his hair by the handfuls. In this state his jailer found him, and reporting his condition, his trial, which was to have taken place previously than that of Ferdinand, was postponed a few days to allow time for his recovery. Bleeding and blistering reduced Lord Edmund's fever, but his soul was still on fire. In the paroxysms of his disorder, no less in his lucid intervals, one sole idea seemed to have taken possession of his fancy, and he inquired incessantly of Father Morris when he returned. "No, no," was the continual answer to his questions, till the heart of the poor prisoner sickened within him with sound. At length he appeared well enough to take his trial, and the day was fixed, as we have already stated. The mind of Edmund now seemed tolerably composed, but it was the stillness of apathy rather than that of resignation, and on the night preceding the day fixed for his trial, some of his former anxious and tormenting fantasies returned. "I will shake off this weakness," he said. "I will read." And drawing his chair near the fire, he took up a book. It was in vain, however, for though he read over the same page repeatedly, he could not compose his mind sufficiently to comprehend its meaning. He threw his book aside, and fixing his eyes upon the fire, was soon lost in gloomy meditations, when a slight noise attracted his attentions, and, looking around, he saw a panel in the wall slowly detach itself, and Father Morris appear in the aperture, followed by another figure, loosely wrapped in a large black cloak. "Father Morris!" cried Edmund. "It is indeed Father Morris, or some kind spirit that has assumed his shape." "It is indeed I, my son," returned the priest, "and I come to rescue and console you." Methinks you came somewhat late, father," said Edmund, rather coldly, "for I have suffered much since I saw you." "Others have suffered too," resumed the monk, "and for your sake. Notwithstanding you have fancied yourself neglected and forgotten by all the world, there is one human being who has never ceased to watch over you, who thinks only of you, who makes your happiness her only care, and who would sacrifice her life to preserve yours." Edmund's heart beat, and his cheeks glowed as he exclaimed, And this kind friend is. Now before you, interrupted the monk, tearing aside the cloak that shrouded his companion, and discovering Rosabella. Rosabella! Exclaimed Edmund, a slight shade of disappointment passing over his features. Oh, Edmund! Cried Rosabella, throwing herself at his feet. Can you forget that I have overstepped the bounds prescribed to my sex? Will you not hate me? I do not blame you. Were unworthy of the name of man if I could. But, father, what ails Elvira? Have you delivered the chain? She refuses either to see or to hear from you. Cruel woman, but perhaps she dreads to see me. I know not, but she treated your petition with contempt. Tell him. I know not, but she treated your petition with contempt. Tell him, she said. It is not possible that he could have aught to say that can interest me. I will not hear his suit. Proud, haughty princess, but was this all? No, I again entreated her to see you, and she turned from me in scorn and bade me leave her. Talk not to me of Edmund, cried she, with a look of ineffable contempt. He was not the wounded Ferdinand, and would you have me forgive him? 1,000 deaths are not sufficient to punish his crime. What a strange infatuation! Strange indeed, for as she interrupted his trial and set him free. Besides which, they say she has actually offered her hand, and he has refused it. Yet still she dotes upon him to distraction. Go, continued she, when I had finished all that I had to say, and tell Edmund that I neither hate nor despise him, for he is incapable of exciting any emotion in my breast. However, if he wishes to make amends for his past conduct, and be restored to my favour, he must first humbly beg pardon of the prince. Damnation! Cried Edmund, starting up fiercely. She did not surely say that, could she? Indeed she did, my lord. Then may 10,000 curses light upon me if I forgive her. Pardon then for that wretch, my slave, my prisoner. No sooner would I expire the horrid torrents, sooner be torn asunder by wild beasts. Pardon that boy. Oh, she could not mean it. Whilst Edmund thus raved, Father Morris and Rosabella watched his torments with much the same coolness as a French philosopher would those of an unfortunate animal upon which he was trying experiments. No feeling of compassion entered their souls, and they only waited to see the effect of their words would produce. It may easily be perceived that the whole scene which Father Morris related as having passed between him and Elvira was a fabrication. But Lord Edmund saw this not, for jealousy often throws a veil over the eyes of its victims, which gives a delusive coloring to everything that they see. Thus Lord Edmund believed every word the father uttered, and his whole frame trembled with agitation to the pace of the room with hasty strides. At last he threw himself upon the chair. "Beg his pardon!" he exclaimed. "Oh, Elvira, Elvira!" As he hid his face in his hands, whilst big tears trickled through his fingers, and Lord Edmund, the stern, courageous soldier, the philosopher, the hero, and the statesman, wept, actually wept, like a feeble child. "Oh, Edmund!" exclaimed Rosabella, approaching him and taking his hand. "I cannot bear to see you in distress. Would to heaven that by the sacrifice of even my life I could relieve you." "Rosabella, you drive me to distraction." "Not for worlds, Edmund. On the contrary, were I mistress of worlds, I would cast them at your feet." I know it, but spare me now." "Spare you, Edmund? Spare what? Spare my reproaches, mean you? Alas, you need not fear them. Am I not devoted to you? Is it not for your sake that I have thus passed the boundaries of my sex? Are you not disgusted by my boldness? But no, you will surely forgive me, for my only motive has been to save you. My only hope of happiness is bound up with yours." "Rosabella," repeated Edmund, "I believe that you love me." "Love you? Oh, heavens, can you doubt my love?" "I do not doubt it. This last action proves it more than words. I have long done you injustice. Can you forgive me, Rosabella?" "Oh, Edmund! Exclaimed the princess, whilst her full heart heaved almost to bursting, and the tears streamed down her face. I've been the victim of an infatuation, continued Edmund. I have loved a false, ungrateful woman who has betrayed me, but I see my folly, and if tears of penitence shed at your feet earn my pardon, if you accept a broken, bleeding heart— Oh, Edmund, interrupted Rosabella, throwing herself into his arms. Say no more. I am yours forever, your devoted slave. Not my slave, Rosabella, said Edmund, gently disagreeing with her, and placing her upon the chair, but my wife, my beloved wife. Your wife! Exclaimed Rosabella. Edmund's wife! I am indeed so blessed. Oh no, surely it is a dream, a fond, delusive dream. You cannot surely be serious. Is this a moment for jest? Asked Edmund calmly. It is certainly not, said Father Morris, whose agitation had been nearly equal to their own, and who stood gazing upon them with the look of the fondest affection. We must immediately escape, or it will be too late. It wants but 2 hours of daybreak, and with the dawn Lord Edmund's trial will commence. True, cried Rosabella. I had forgotten. Dearest Edmund, you must consent to fly, or your precious life will be sacrificed. But how shall we escape? Through the panel. A balloon waits a little distance, and this cloak will conceal your person from observation. Dear Rosabella! Come, cried Father Morris. You have no time to lose. Though Ferdinand was acquitted, you must fall, for the state requires a victim. Lord Edmund waited no more. The name of Ferdinand was torture to him, and hastily disencumbering himself from his change, he followed the father and Rosabella from the prison. He sighed, however, and looked back for a moment with regret ere he quitted the outer walls, for he thought of Elvira. Rosabella's quick ear caught the sigh, and her supple spirit divined its meaning, but this was not a moment to complain, and stepping into the balloon they were soon out of sight of London. They proceeded to a palace of Rosabella's, a few miles out of town, and there, the following day, Edmund became her husband. In the meantime, the excessive agitation Elvira experienced on the day of Prince Ferdinand's trial brought on a return of her fever, and it was several weeks ere she was sufficiently recovered to leave her bed. When she did so, however, she was really shocked at the state in which she had found her kingdom. When first she began to reign, carried away by the enthusiasm of the moment, she had taken too much of the executive part of the government upon herself, and as her illness had become too sullen to allow her to appoint a regent, no one knew who ought to supply her place. All, therefore, was confusion and disorder, and Elvira shrunk disgusted from the chaos before her. She had now no Edmund to smooth the way for her, and the native energy of her mind was gone. Pale, heartbroken, and dispirited, she felt languid and incapable of the slightest exertion. What had formerly been a pleasure was now become an overwhelming burden, and the weight of life seemed insupportable. She was now very weary of the fatigue necessary to carry on the plans she had projected for the benefit of her people. At first, when all seemed new and delightful, she had devoted herself entirely to their interests. She had denied herself even the most trifling pleasures, and scarcely allowed herself the time absolutely necessary for food and rest. This was all very well, whilst her plans had the charm of novelty, and were supported by passion. But now that novelty had worn off, and they had assumed the dull, wearisome appearance of duties, when repeated disappointments had extinguished almost the hope of success. And when she found the people expected, nay, demanded as a right that which she had originally granted them only as a special mark of favor, she discovered, though too late, the folly of the toil she had imposed upon herself. She now discovered that improvement to be effectual must be slow, that people don't like to be forced out of old habits, till they have seen the effect of new ones proved by experience, and that nothing is so difficult as to improve people against their will. Increase the resources of a country, throw money into the hands of the middling and lower classes, and they will improve themselves. But at length, 9/10 of the population will never suffer themselves to be improved. Those only who have attempted this thankless and painful orifice can fully estimate the sufferings of the unfortunate Elvira, who, disappointed in all she had undertook, found life become tasteless and insipid, and was completely wretched, though surrounded by all the gifts of beauty, power, and fortune. Guilty. Everything seemed to conspire to increase her misery. Those whom she raised from indolence to affluence treated her with the most provoking insolence and discontent. A plan which had been opposed by the lords Gustavus de Montfort and Maysworth, and which she had persisted in having tried, had completely failed, and the noble lords had triumphed in the most provoking manner in her disappointment. Thank you for the hydrate. And the stretch. Everything seemed let's see. A plan which had been opposed by the lords Gustavus and Montfort and Maysworth, and which she had persisted in having tried, had completely failed, and the noble lords had triumphed in the most provoking manner in her disappointment. In short, everything went wrong, and Elvira, disgusted with the world, felt mortified and disgusted with herself. "How hard it is," thought she frequently, as she tossed upon her sleepless couch, "that I, who, since my accession to the throne, have devoted myself entirely to the interests of my subjects, should thus be wretched, whilst tyrants who live to oppress sleep quietly upon their beds of down. Alas, why can I not be as they are? Why cannot I divest myself of reflection and enjoy the pleasures that surround me? But what pleasures can I enjoy? Alas, the world presents nothing that can interest me. An insipid vacuum spreads through creation. My heart is cold and desolate. My affections are thrown back upon myself, and I am miserable." Thus raved Elvira, and absorbed in painful meditations, she neglected her duties of her station and resigned herself to despair, whilst the people, attributing her evident wretchedness to her grief for the absence of Prince Ferdinand, who had left London immediately after his trial, and had not been heard of, became every hour more and more discontented with their queen. In the meantime, the marriage of Lord Edmund, though not openly avowed, was generally suspected, and the party of Rosabella gained strength every day, whilst mysterious rumours were whispered from mouth to mouth, and divers hints given that many knew more than they chose to say, though from the immense number of these mystery-mongers it seemed, as in the celebrated scene in The Barber of Seville, that everyone was in secret, though nobody was to divulge it. The listlessness of Elvira soon produced the most serious effects. A kingdom without a government, or rather a government without a chief, cannot long go on well. It is like a ship at sea without a pilot, and it must flounder upon the first rock that impedes its course. When the vigor of government is from any cause relaxed, there are always plenty of persons ready to take advantage of the opportunity afforded them to commit the evil of impunity. The crimes of every description multiplied so fast under the negligent sway of Elvira that the people became clamorous in their complaints. But to whom could they address themselves? The queen was rarely visible, Lord Edmund was gone, and the lords of the council were too busy talking about the interests of the people to think of really attending to them, and while the Duke and Sir Ambrose seemed too old to be likely to trouble themselves by intermeddling with the affairs of state. To them, however, the people looked as a dernier resort, and it was seemed indelicate to apply to the Duke when the person they complained about was his own daughter. They entreated Sir Ambrose to present a petition to the Queen in their behalf. The worthy baronites assented to the request, and though almost bent to the earth by age and misery, prepared once more to appear at court. The loss of his beloved Edmund had affected the old man deeply. He considered his flight before the trial a confession of guilt, and the thought of disgrace weighed down his gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. The distress of the people, however, roused him from the apathy into which he was fast falling, and when he waited upon the Queen, it was with all the energy of his former years. Freaking ad. For some reason, it switched my pre-roll timer to 30 minutes. Hopefully it'll be fixed tomorrow. I really hope it's fixed tomorrow. I tried to fix it tonight. It did not work, so... So, I put the gift subs on discount through almost midnight tomorrow, Central, so... I figured I'd go ahead and use the discount thing while I had the chance. I figured, affiliate anniversary streams seemed appropriate, so... Yeah. Pseudo-widow staffu? I don't know. Okay. Okay, ads says 4 seconds left. Okay, ad break's over. Welcome back. The Queen received him sullenly. I cannot help it, Sir Ambrose, she said. I am sorry for my people, but I cannot do anything to relieve them. I feel that I am fast sinking into the tomb. Do not disturb them in my last moments by fruitless solicitations. Last moments, cried Sir Ambrose indignantly. Rally your energies, and you may live half a century. You give way to a morbid sensibility that oppresses you, and because some of your hopes have been disappointed, you shrink from the duties that you have imposed upon yourself, and talk of your last moments. Shame, shame, Elvira! Rouse yourself from this lethargy, and be indeed queen. Remember that though nature has ordinarily denied your sex the power of triumphing in this field, she has yet left a far greater conquest for you to achieve, the conquest of yourself. For it is far more glorious to subdue the wayward desires of the human heart than to lead scores of monarchs captive in your chains. Struggle then with your feelings, conquer those fatal passions that threaten to destroy you, show yourself worthy of your crown, and be again the Elvira for whom even in her childhood I anticipated greatness. It is too late, interrupted the Queen impatiently. It is now too late. Urge me no more, Sir Ambrose, or you will drive me to despair. Sir Ambrose was provoked at her obstinacy, and the pause ensued, which was broken by a tumultuous noise and shouting. It was the people at the gates of the palace who, impatient at the length of Sir Ambrose's stay, were now becoming clamorous for an answer. What shall I say to them? Asked the baronet. Tell them I deny their suit, replied the Queen. Away, away, away! I would be quiet. Go without reply. I will hear no more. I will not be tormented. And waving her hand for him to depart, she hurried to her chamber. Finding there was no alternative, Sir Ambrose was compelled to appear before the people and acquaint them with the will of their sovereign. The tumult became more violent as he spoke. An English mob is proverbially impetuous, and now their rage rose beyond control. The Queen! The Queen! They shouted. We will see the Queen! The crowd increased every moment. The multitude heaved in tremendous waves like the rolling billows of the sea, and a hum of thousands of human voices filled the air. They threatened to storm the palace. A man in complete armor, his face entirely concealed by his visor, headed their attempts. The outer gates were forced, and a throng rushed tumultuously into the court of the palace. Oh, there was confusion. The soldiers might have been summoned, and the palace defended, but there was no one to give orders, and the servants ran to and fro in the greatest possible distress, without knowing either where they were going or what they intended doing. In the midst of the bustle, Elvira sat burying her face in her hands, and obstinately refusing to take the slightest interest in the scene. The door opened violently, and Sir Ambrose and some of their principal servants rushed in. "For God's sake, save yourself," said they. "If your majesty were safe, we care not for ourselves." "Fly!" said Sir Ambrose, throwing himself upon his knees before her, his white hair streaming almost to the ground. "For God's sake, fly!" It was too late, however. Then the queen had been disposed to obey him, for as he spoke, the outer door burst open with tremendous violence, and the palace seemed to shake to its foundation with the shock, and in an instant the chamber was filled by an infuriated populace. "Seize the queen, but do not injure her!" cried a voice that trilled through every nerve of Sir Ambrose. "Spare the old man! Do not hurt a hair on his head!" Sir Ambrose looked up. The voice came from a man in armor. It was the voice of Edmund. A crowd of overwhelming thoughts rushed through his mind, and overpowered by their weight, he sank senseless upon the ground. "Take him away!" cried Edmund, for it was indeed he. "Take him away, but see that ye hurt him not. He dies that injures him." "Edmund!" cries Elvira, also struck by his voice. "To the prison with her!" "To the prison? Do you doom your queen into prison? Is that how you treat your sovereign?" "I own no sovereign here but Rosabella." But by what right can she be called your sovereign?" "By that which made you queen, the people's voice. It lies with them to crown or dethrone." "Oh, Edmund, mercy!" "Away with her! I will hear no more." The guard seized upon the unfortunate queen, and in spite of her entreaties, hurried her away. Edmund did not trust himself to look at her. For a moment he hid his face in his hands, then rousing himself he exclaimed, "Now to proclaim the queen!" The people followed him with shouts of applause, and before evening Edmund and Rosabella were unanimously acknowledged King and Queen of England. Okay, that's the turn of events. Chapter 30. Notwithstanding the able manner in which the revolution had been effected, England was still in a state of tumult. Though the army had been seduced by the example of Edmund, and the people had been obliged to submit, they were by no means perfectly satisfied with the new government, and Rosabella found, too late, that though the throne might be compared to a bed of roses, it was not without its thorns. The discontented nobles who had aided her cause were also extremely displeased by what they called the trifling value of rewards bestowed upon them, though in fact they rated their services so high that Rosabella found her whole kingdom did not possess the power of repaying them to their satisfaction. It was also a considerable grievance of these haughty nobles to see Prince Ferdinand return to the English court immediately after the dethronement of Elvira, and be received with open arms by Rosabella, who, with the anxiety of conciliation of friendship for foreign powers, usually displayed by those whose thrones feel far from secure from home, loaded him with favors, and even gave him a post of honor in the command of her own bodyguard. Whilst the unreasonableness of her people thus embittered Rosabella's political life, her domestic happiness seemed to rest upon a yet more unstable foundation. She knew that though she possessed Edmund's hand, his heart was still devoted to Elvira, and jealousy made her view all his actions in a distorted light. If he were sad, she was sure he was thinking of her rival. If he was gay, she fancied it a mask put on to only deceive her. She was thus completely miserable, and Edmund was as wretched as herself. He felt that he had sacrificed himself to revenge, and sold his peace for a bauble, which, when obtained, did not seem worth the trouble of possessing. His father, too, Sir Ambrose, his doting father, was now entirely estranged from him, as he repeatedly declared he would never forgive a traitor who could not forget his oath of allegiance of his own aggrandizement. "No," exclaimed the old man, "I loved and doted upon Edmund, but the Edmund I loved is vanished. My darling son was brave and noble, and not a deceptive scoundrel. No, no, my old heart may break, nay, I hope it will, but never whilst I live shall a deceitful traitor be pressed against this breast." Edmund was inconsolable. He passionately loved his father, and could not bear his anger. Besides, he felt that the reproaches of the old man were seconded by those of his own heart. It is painful at any time to bear the censures of the world, but they fall with double weight when we know that they are well deserved. Edmund was dissatisfied with himself, and consequently disposed to quarrel with the world. He fancied it looked coldly upon him, and, in return, he affected to despise it. 100 times a day he repeated that he was perfectly indifferent to everything that was said to him, whilst his nervous anxiety to pursue the newspapers and make himself perfectly acquainted with every popular rumor proved that he was only too sensible to every word that was uttered. Edmund had made the mob his idol. He could not live without its applauses, or wretched indeed are those who thus depend on others for their hopes of happiness. Edmund's disgust at his new rank and the situation was soon still farther increased by a visit of Lord Gustavus, who with several other lords was deputed to present to his Majesty the complaints of the Commons. They wanted to be enfranchised, they desired innumerable rights and privileges, and in fact they wanted all to be kings. For if half of they demanded to be granted, Edmund must have made them more powerful than himself. He pointed this out to Lord Gustavus, and condescended to reason with him upon the folly of their desires. "Impossible!" cried Lord Gustavus. "Your Majesty must excuse me, but I cannot listen to such arguments. I came here to defend the liberties of the people. Reform is necessary. Without reform nothing can go on well. Evils must be torn up, root and branch." "Are not my subjects healthy, wealthy, and prosperous?" asked Edmund. "Have they not been successful at home and abroad? Do the English peasants live as well as the foreign princes? And what more can they require?" "Liberty, sir," returns Lord Gustavus. "What are all these pretended advantages without liberty? Mere toys, gaudy apples, but rotten at their core. Of what use indeed are all the blessings of life without liberty to give them zest, the radical reform to purge them of all impurities? But listen to reason. Reason, thinking as I think, and I am sure as every rational being must think, your Majesty must forgive me if I assent, that even the reason herself does not deserve to be attended to, and when she is basely enlisted upon the side of tyranny." "Nay, then," said Edmund, "it is useless to attempt to argue with you. I thought you had made reason your goddess, but if you worship her only as long as it suits your own purposes, I have done. You may retire. I shall take the petition into consideration, and give it to the answer when I think it may fit." Edmund, who was being degraded and abased in his own opinion, no longer possessed that confidence in himself that carried conviction with all he said, had yet sufficient dignity in this manner to awe those into silence who dared to dispute his commands. And Lord Gustavus and his colleagues, not presuming to make further remonstrance, retired in the dungeon. This incident contributed to sicken Edmund the reigning. He became disgusted with his queen, his court, his kingdom, and his country, and, secluding himself as much as possible from public life, left the care of managing the affairs of state to Rosabella and Father Morris, who, now throwing off the disguise he had so long worn, appeared openly as the dispenser of all her favors and the arbiter of her actions. The spirit of poor Sir Ambrose was quite broken by these misfortunes. The defection of his son, and the ingratitude of his confessor, stung him to the core. He retired again to the country, where his friend the Duke, Clara, and Father Murphy, he contrived to exist, though but the shadow of his former self. The Duke was also grievously changed, and it was melancholy to see those two poor old men wandering about their splendid gardens and magnificent palaces like roaming ghosts, permitted to revisit for a time the scenes of their departed happiness. Clara now became the sole stay that bound these old men to life. Her character had developed itself wonderfully in the midst of striking events she had witnessed. Firm, courageous, and enterprising, though still gentle, the lively girl seemed changed into an intelligent woman, whose active mind and comprehensive spirit foresaw everything and provided against every emergency. Clara was still young, but her spirit was mature beyond her years, and her attention to the Duke and Sir Ambrose was unremitting. "Oh," they would often say, "though we have lost much, we ought to be thankful that Clara is spared to us." And then, with tears trickled down their aged cheeks, they would join in imploring heaven to shower down blessings upon her head. In the meantime, however, Clara herself was far from happy. She would, it is true, exert herself to appear cheerful, but it was evident it was an exertion, and often, when the Duke and Sir Ambrose had seated themselves at the party at chess, she would steal out unobserved and retire to a little pavilion in the garden, near what were formerly the apartments of Father Morris, and being the most secluded spot she could find, this part of the mansion having been carefully shut up and avoided by every human being since the departure of the priest, as infectious, the indignation and worthy and detached servants of Sir Ambrose felt towards Father Morris for his desertion of their master being extended even to those rooms he had occupied. In this secluded spot Clara often sat for hours, lost in meditation, her head resting upon her hand and her eyes fixed in vacancy. Winter had now given place to spring, and all nature seemed to revive with that gay and joyous season. The heart of Clara, however, was still lonely. She fancied it could enjoy no second summer, and she felt almost disposed to quarrel with all around her for displaying the gaiety in which she could not participate. Nothing makes a broken heart feel more gloomy than to see all the other objects look gay. It turns from them in disgust. It feels its own misery doubled by the sight of their happiness. One evening, as Clara was sitting absorbed in melancholy reflections, she was startled by a heaping, a deep-drawn sigh heaved heavily behind her. She turned, and fancied she could distinguish a figure in the midst of the twilight, but, magnified by the obscurity, the figure seemed of gigantic proportions. Uttering a faint scream, she attempted to fly, when the hand of iron grasped her and arrested her progress. An icy chill shot to her heart, as the well-remembered voice of Cheops sounded in her ears. "Clara," he said in his deep, sepulchral voice, "would you save your queen?" "The sacrifice of my life, if necessary," replied Clara firmly. "Clara," continued the mummy, "I have marked you attentively, and as I do not know any individual possessing more strength of mind and personal courage than yourself, I have fixed upon you to be my assistant in this enterprise. The life of Elvira is in danger, and even my influence cannot much longer save her, if she remain in the power of Father Morris. Besides, the lesson she has already had, she has sufficiently severe. I will aid to her escape, and you will assist me. You shall go to Ireland, and there, if the warlike Roderick be not deaf to the cries of beauty and distress, through his aid Elvira may hope redress. At least, she must implore his help. Rosabella is now at the palace near his, and she has brought her rival in for a train, for, with the usual jealousy and suspicion of tyrants and usurpers, she scarcely dares to trust her from her sight. Besides this, her diabolical revenge is gratified in making Elvira wait humbly near her throne and serve in those palaces where she once commanded. Moved by this ungenerous conduct and the impatience by which she is unhappy, Elvira bears her sufferings. The nobles and the people of the reign begin to pity her, and when they are disgusted with the haughtiness and intolerance of Rosabella, they sigh for the return of the gentle Elvira. Father Morris perceives this, and determining to rid Rosabella of her rival, the fair Elvira fades beneath his arts, like a flower withering on its stem. That means the mummy voice is working properly. She must be saved, said Clara with enthusiasm. She shall be saved. Point put out the means, and I'm devoted to her service. You must assume these weeds and follow me, said Cheops, pointing to a bundle in the corner of the pavilion, which Clara had not before noticed. In half an hour, I will return for you. And my sudden disappearance, rejoined Clara, would not excite suspicion. The river is deep and rapid, returned Cheops. Some of your clothes left upon its banks. I comprehend, cried Clara eagerly. But the poor Duke and Sir Ambrose. Their anxiety and distress may be great, but cannot be lasting. The feelings of age are blunt, and... Oh no, exclaimed Clara. You're deceived. Nay, I think that age feels grief more acutely than youth. The mind has lost its elasticity. Hope is dead within it, and they will brood over their secret sorrow till they destroy their... By Cyrus, thou art a most extraordinary girl, said Cheops. The old do brood over grief, but why say this to me? Do I not know it well? Too well, continued he, looking at her earnestly. Clara turned pale and trembled. He saw her agitation, and hastily averting his eyes, continued, in a calmer tone. Whatever the sufferings of the old men may be for the moment, I suppose even you will allow the life of Elvira more than counterbalances them. And by inflicting this temporary pain, you'll save them from the more lasting agony they would endure from her death. For Father Morris is so subtle that it would be dangerous to give him the slightest hint of our intention, lest he should be sworn it from them. Be ready then, Clara. Resign yourself to my instructions, and above all, fear not. Clara bent her head in token of assent, and Cheops disappeared. Upon examining the clothes, Clara felt them to be the dress of a Greek peasant boy, numbers of whom at this period were rambling over England, singing wild romances to their harps and lutes, and telling fortunes of a kind of doggerel rhyme. Exposure to the air tanned most of these wandering minstrels brown, and Clara found a bottle of liquid in the parcel to stain her face and hands. She bound up her flaxen ringlets, and covering head with curls of the jetty blackness, she found the metamorphosis so complete that she scarcely knew herself as she saw her figure reflected in a large mirror behind her. It was now nearly dark, but Cheops had left the necessary implements for striking a light, and Clara made her toilet without the least difficulty. Anxious were the moments, however, that passed after her task was completed, till the arrival of Cheops, and when he did come, she saw he was attired as herself. He grasped her arm, and without speaking, led her to the banks of the river. Clara shuddered as she found herself alone in the power of this mysterious being, and she saw the river roll up deep and dark beneath her feet. Cheops felt her shudder, and cried with one of his horrid laughs, which sounded fearfully amidst the stillness of the night. "What? Do even you fear me? Is there no courage in this degenerate race? None. What do you fear? If you dread to trust yourself in my power, or think yourself unequal to the task you have undertaken, retire. There is yet time, and I wish no unwilling agents. Poor child," continued he, looking at her with feeling. "Thou dost not know me, but for worlds I would not harm thee."
"I will go with you," said Clara resolutely. "I do not shrink. Let what will await me. I will not recede. Though unheard of torments may attend me, I will endure them."
"By the holy gods of my forefathers," cried Cheops, "she is a brave girl. Yes, Clara, I will trust thee, and though we should encounter horrors fearful as those which menace the Nati and the dread Isian mysteries, I will not doubt thy courage. A determined spirit, Clara, may subdue even fate." "I do so appreciate the compliment of my coarseness." As he spoke, he threw the clothes she had brought for the purpose of carelessly upon the banks of the river, and then again seizing her arm, he dragged her forward with such rapidity that in an incredibly short time they approached the palace of Rosabella. The mansion region was an enchantment. Brilliantly illuminated, light streamed from every window, and through the colonnade of the great hall, groups of elegantly dressed people were seen gaily moving to and fro, some dancing and others listening to harmonious music. Clara, though terrified and exhausted, felt still irresistibly impelled to proceed, and still, guided by her strange companion, entered unobserved the outer court of the palace. "Prince Ferdinand of Germany commands the guard tonight," whispered Cheops in a low, unnatural voice. "It is well. He shall go with us."
"But will he?"
asked Clara tremblingly. "Will he?" returned Cheops with his particular sneer. "Dost thou doubt my power, girl?" Clara and Cheops had now reached the palace from whence, unobserved, they could survey the whole of the splendid apartment before them. They had, in fact, entered the hall and placed themselves in a kind of recess shaded by projecting pillars, from whence they could see every part of the salon. Clara was astonished to find herself so easily in the presence of the queen, for she knew not how they had attained their present situation, and she would have spoken to ask Cheops, but he laid his finger upon his lips, and whispering, "Hippocrates was the only son of Osiris and Isis." She comprehended he meant that wisdom and knowledge produced silence, and she did not dare to breathe a syllable. Rosabella sate upon a splendid dais, gorgeously attired, her black eyes flashing with the added brilliancy of the deep rouge upon her cheeks, whilst her raven hair was adorned with diamonds, and a splendid tiara of the same precious stones sparkled on her forehead. A robe of crimson velvet, bordered with ermine, fell in graceful folds over her fine figure, whilst her swan-like neck and snowy arms, exposed perhaps more than the delicacy might strictly warrant, were also loaded with costly jewels. Around her stood the ladies of the court, and amongst the rest Elvira, plainly attired in a robe of grey dark silk. No ornament shone amongst those her golden tresses, and her naturally fair complexion seemed faded to sickly and unnatural whiteness. The indignation of Clara could scarcely be restrained at the sight, but Cheops laying his hand upon her arm, they stood suddenly before the queen.
Ah, who are these?
Cried Rosabella, starting. Cheops took no notice of her surprise, but, tuning his lute, began to sing. Oh god, this is going to be difficult. Singing is Cheops. Loveliest queen, oh deign to hear the humblest of thy suppliants' prayer. Let me on a stranger's smile besought thy happy isle, to feast his eyes upon that face where majesty combines with grace. Not the worst singing I've done.
What means this mummery?
Asked Rosabella.
How came these minstrels here? It is doubtless a device of the king,
returned some of her ladies,
to amuse your majesty.
Rosabella smiled. Attentions were now so rare upon the part of Edmund towards her that she felt gratified that it should even be supposed he wished to please her, and addressing the minstrel more graciously, asked what brought him to England. He sung his reply. Full often in my native land I've struck the lute with bolder hand, but with the liberties of Greece her minstrel's harmony must cease. Since I won with a soldier's frown hath seized and worn thy imperial crown, those hearts with spurned despotic power must wander from their native bower, and in far distant lands must try the meaner arts of palmistry. Give then your hand, fair lady, give, and let the wandering minstrel live. So shall he tell the varied fate that may that lovely form await. To order strains his voice is mute, broken his heart, unstrung his lute. Dang. I've tried singing as a mermaid before. I can't say I've sung as a mummy. I will have to try that sometime.
What say you, ladies?
Said Rosabella, smiling again.
Shall we hear our destiny?
The ladies, delighted at anything that promised an interruption to the general gloom which hung over Rosabella's court, gladly assented, and, to Clara's infinite surprise, the mummy addressed a few doggerel verses to each. When Elvira's turn came, Clara perceived her color was heightened, and that she trembled excessively, yet the mummy's verses to her were unmeaning as to the rest. Whilst the scene was passing, the king and Father Morris approached. The former stood silent and abstracted, apparently quite unconscious of the group before him, whilst Father Morris gazed at them intently, with a satirical sneer upon his countenance, as though in thorough contempt of such folly. How can you
endure such...
Oh, wait. This is supposed to be the father. Okay. How do you endure such mummery? He said to Rosabella after a short pause.
Anything for a change,
she said, sighing. The father's dark eye glanced upon the king, and then upon Rosabella, as with a gloomy frown he stalked on. The queen colored, and hastily waving her hand to the minstrel as a sign that he might depart, she turned away, and the disappointed ladies were reluctantly obliged to follow her in a train. In a few minutes, however, the page returned with a chain and a purse of gold, which he gave to the minstrels and retired. Clara was upon the point of refusing her share of the bounty, but a look from the mummy made her sensible of her error, and she took it without uttering a syllable. Her hesitation, however, did not pass unnoticed, and she found, to her infinite horror, that when they quitted the palace, two of the queen's servants had followed them. Clara trembled excessively and clung tightly to the mummy's arm for protection, but that mysterious being still stalked on from the same indifference as before. Clara longed to give him some imitation of the danger that awaited him, but she could not speak. The words seemed to swell in her throat and almost choke her, while she found herself dragged along by an irresistible influence too powerful to admit of even her struggling against it. Inexpressible agony, however, seized her as she found herself hurried towards the river, and when, as they almost reached the brink, she beheld Cheops stamp with an almost supernatural force upon the fragile bridge which stretched across the water, and saw the slender plank slink beneath its weight, she could bear no more, and screaming in horror, rushed towards and to save him. A strong arm, however, pulled her back. She felt herself whirled around. For a moment her senses seemed to desert her. The next instant she found that she had been dragged under some bushes, and saw their pursuers rush down to the place where the bridge had broken. "They're gone, by Jupiter," said one. "I heard them fall into the water. It was a tremendous crash." "I heard them," returned the other. "They fell as heavy as lead, and how they screamed!" "The young one screamed," said the first, "but the old one groaned." "What does it matter," resumed the second, "whether they screamed or groaned? They're gone to the devil a little before their time, and so we only have to go back as we came. Between ourselves, it was some nonsense to take the trouble to watch them. They were evidently only what they seemed to be, and even Father Morris, suspicious as he is, gave us no orders about them." "Thy dull head cannot see," said the first. "Father's negligence has been the very motive of my vigilance. Things are not with him as they have been. He wants to rule the queen with an iron rod, and Rosabella will not endure control. Now, it struck me when I saw the youth's hesitation that all was not right, and I thought if I could discover what had escaped him—" "I see," said the other. "His lifeless trunk might have had the honor of serving as stepping-stone to enable you to rise." "It is possible," returned the other, laughing, and they retired, their voices gradually dying away until they became inaudible in the distance. Clara now perceived that the mummy stood beside her. He did not speak, but pressed his finger upon his lips in a token of silence, and for some minutes they stood fixed to the spot, till at last the faint echo of the servant's footsteps died away. He again seized the arm of Clara and hurried away towards the gloomy cave. They stopped at the entrance, and though the poor girl was still too much terrified to speak, yet she felt somewhat relieved by the discovery that the mummy had evidently saved her from danger, instead of, as she feared, precipitating her into it. She still gazed with awe, however, at his strange unearthly figure, as he stood with his eyes fixed earnestly upon a star, and apparently occupied in muttering prayers addressed to it. "Clara," he said at length, his voice deep and full of echoing solemnity through the vaulted cave. "Clara," he again repeated, whilst the blood of his terrified companion seemed to curdle in her veins at the awful sound. She, however, slowly and tremblingly advanced. He had grasped her arm. She attempted to shrink back, but seemed fixed as though by magic. "Hear me," continued the mummy in a low, hollow tone, which appeared to rise from the tomb. "Elvira understood my signal, and soon she will be here. You must do the rest. Prince Ferdinand keeps guard tonight. Pass through this cave. The outlet will bring you to his station. Throw yourself at his feet and appeal to his compassion to whatever language the feelings of the moment may inspire. He will readily listen to you, for he has not forgotten your visit to him in the prison, and will swear to devote himself to your service. Tell him you accept his offers, and entreat him to convey yourself to the Queen and the island, where Roderick will receive and protect you. He will immediately comply, and his being the companion of your flight will induce the belief that you are gone to Germany, and will consequently prevent the least danger of pursuit. At this moment, a slight figure, wrapped in a large mantle, appeared at the entrance of the cavern. "Elvira!" cried Cheops, and the stranger sprang forth.
Then I'm right.
Exclaimed she, whilst her whole frame trembled with agitation. "This is your guide," said Cheops in his deep, sepulchral tone. "Follow her, and you will do well. Farewell, but we shall meet again." Then, bending over her, he pressed his lips to her forehead, and to that of Clara. Both shuddered at the touch of those cold marble lips, and an icy chill ran through their veins, as a fearful conviction that their companion was no earthly being thrilled in their bosoms. Even the strongest minds dread supernatural horrors, and our fair fugitives turned involuntarily away. When they looked again, the mummy was gone, and the darkness appeared so profound that they were obliged to grope their way cautiously along. Fearing alike to remain or to advance, they proceeded with trembling steps slowly along a narrow passage, their minds filled with that vague sense of danger that generally attends the want of light. When imagination pictures terrors which they do not really exist, and fancy lends to aid to magnify those which do. By degrees, however, the queen and her companion became accustomed to the darkness, and as the pupils of their eyes dilated, they were enabled to discern the objects around them. Innumerable fantastic shapes, however, now appeared to flit before them, and grim giants to frown awfully from every corner of the gloomy vault they traversed. A dim and indistinct light threw a misty veil around the projecting corners of the rocks that gave them fearful and unnatural grandeur, and stood a few moments, not daring to advance into the darker abysses of the caverns, and yet dreading alike to remain where they were, or to return.
We must go on,
said Elvira at length, her voice echoing through the cave, till she started at the sound.
Oh, God!
cried Clara.
Hark! 1,000 mocking demons seem to repeat from every rock. Go on! Go on, go on, go on.
Again rang the 1,000 varied tones in the cavern.
Let us proceed,
whispered Elvira, shuddering.
This is a fearful place.
And they hurried on as fast as their trembling limbs could carry them, along the dark and gloomy passage, leading the direction pointed out by the mummy. In a few minutes, however, a bright, though glimmering light appeared far off, like a star, which, gleaming through the darkness, seemed a beacon of hope to guide them on to happiness. A slight current of air, too, now blew freshly in their faces, and their spirits rose, as with quickened steps they hastened onward to the direction from whence it appeared to proceed. The light now seemed rapidly to enlarge, and the wind blew more freshly, whilst the queen and her companion distinctly heard the heavy stamping of horses, which vibrated fearfully on the hollow ground, and grew louder and louder every moment as they advanced.
"Ah, what is that?"
cried Elvira, trembling, clinging closer to her companion.
It is the bivouac of Princess Ferdinand,"
replied Clara.
"The mummy told me we would find him here, and that he would aid us." "Ah, that fearful mummy!"
murmured Elvira softly.
"If he should deceive us, and this should only be a plan to betray us to our enemies."
"Fear not," said Clara.
"Come what may, we must dare the worst."
They had now reached the outlet of the cavern, and found an opening large enough to admit of a single person. Cautiously advancing towards it, they paused for a few moments ere they descended, to gaze upon the scene below. A troop of soldiers were scattered around, in various attitudes of repose, under a small grove of trees, whilst their horses grazed at a little distance. The prince alone seemed awake, and he lay apart from his companions, stretched upon a grassy bank, a thick tree spreading above him, his head resting upon his hand, and his eyes fixed upon the ground. The moon shone brightly and played upon the prince's polished armor, like summer dancing upon a lake. His helmet was thrown aside, and his countenance looked pale and sad, whilst his frequent sighs betrayed the uneasiness of his mind.
"Let us advance," said Clara, "and try to move to his compassion."
Elvira complied, with light and timid steps, fearing almost to breathe, lest they should break the slumbers of their enemies. They approached the prince. All was still, save the hard breathing of the sleeping soldiers, and the measured clamping of the horses, their stately figures strongly relieved by the dark gray sky beyond, and their long manes and sweeping tails sweeping the ground. The prince was now listlessly tracing the figures in the grass with the scabbard of his sword. He started as they approached and hastily demanded the cause of their intrusion.
"Mercy!"
cried Elvira, sinking upon her knees before him.
"Mercy!"
She could say no more, but gasping for breath, she stretched out her arms imploringly, whilst everything around seemed to swim before her eyes, and the figures of the prince, the trees, the horses, and the sleeping soldiers appeared all dilated to gigantic magnitude. She entirely forgot the pathetic appeal she had intended in making the prince's feelings, and every faculty seemed suspended in the intenseness of her anxiety.
"For heaven's sake, good youth,"
exclaimed the prince, addressing Clara,
"explain the meaning of the scene. Why does this lovely female kneel to me, and why does she implore my mercy?" "Because she has no other hope, save in that, in heaven,"
said Clara solemnly.
"It is the queen."
"Elvira!" cried the prince. Then raising her eagerly, he continued,
"Your majesty may command my services. Only tell me how I may assist you."
A few words from Clara explained the urgency of their situation, and the prince, promising to meet them with horses in an hour, persuaded them to return to the cavern till he should rejoin them. Heavily rolled the minutes of this tedious hour, which seemed destined never to have an end, till the nerves of Elvira and Clara were wrought up in such a pitch of agony that death would have appeared a blessing. At length the prince came, bringing with him only his faithful hounds. The sight of him was sufficient to rouse the almost fainting spirits of the queen, and, without speaking a single word, she and Clara hurried after their conductors to the wood where the horses were waiting for them. They mounted, still in perfect silence, and hurried through the most intricate paths they could find, for as morning dawned, they feared inevitable destruction. Before it became quite light, however, they had reached a thick wood, near the center of which they found a half-ruined hut, and here did the ci devant Queen of England and her suite try to obtain a few hours' repose. But alas, sleep fled from Elvira's eyes. She could not forget she was a fugitive in her own kingdom, and flying from terror from those very people who, but a few months before, had almost worshipped her like a goddess. Not even the exhaustion of her body could overcome the hurry of her spirits, whilst every time she closed her eyes and felt a soft doze creeping over her troubled senses, she started up again in horror, fancying her pursuers had overtaken her. Consternation reigned in the palace when the flight of Elvira and the defection of Prince Ferdinand were made known. "She has gone to Germany!" was the universal cry, and troops were directly dispatched to all seaports, whilst a whole fleet of balloons were secured to scour the air in all directions, and arrest every aerial vehicle they could find, whose passengers could not give a perfectly satisfactory account of themselves. These commissions were executed to the letter, as the guards now sought the extra diligence to excuse the negligence which they had suffered the queen to escape, and numerous were the wandering lovers, absconding clerks, and unfaithful wives who were brought before the council, instead of Elvira and the German prince, of whom, however, nothing could be heard, their measures having been taken too well to expose them to detection. In the meantime, the hat and mantle of Clara having been found upon the banks of the river, the Duke and Sir Ambrose were inconsolable, and dispatched emissaries everywhere in search of her. Amongst the rest, Father Murphy and Abelard were sent to the summer palace of the Queen to inquire if there had been a heard of. Rosabelle and her court, however, had removed to London immediately upon the flight of Elvira being discovered, and the disconsolate searchers having inquired of everyone they met in vain, wandering through the gardens, restless and forlorn, till at last they had found the mysterious cavern. The aspect of the palace The aspect of the place was dreary in the extreme. A few stunted shrubs grew upon the banks of a dull, dark rivulet. Father Murphy shivered as he crossed himself as he looked around. "Oh, the mother! And this is an awful place, Mr. Abelard," he said. "And I'm thinking after the sooner we get out of here, the better." "What is that?" cried the butler, springing forward eagerly and snatching at something in the bushes that looked white. "Ah, it's Clara's pocket handkerchief, the poor darling," said the friar. "See, here's her name worked upon it by her own pretty fingers." And as he turned to examine it, his foot slipped, and he rolled into the water, floundering about like a huge porpoise. Oh dear," cried Abelard. "He will certainly be drowned. Submersion in the aqueous fluid is almost always destructive of animal life, and I see little chance that he has of escape." "Ach, will you let down the drown when you're talking?" asked the indignant priest. "Before it's the good-natured thing you be doing and pulling me out, yet you be suffocated." "Oh, no, certainly not," replied Edward. "My agony is unspeakable at your distress. I only doubt how I shall be able to raise you without a lever or pulley. The application of the mechanical powers—" "May you go to the devil!" cried Father Murphy as he crawled out without assistance. "And so you have let me drown, whilst you were talking of the mechanical powers." "Excuse me, Father," returned Abelard. "Friendship is a powerful affection of the human mind. It invigorates, it warms—" "Does it?" said the priest, shaking himself like a water-spaniel. "Then I should be very glad to have little of it at present, for I am shivering with cold, to say nothing of being hungry, that I could eat my fingers." "I'm surprised to hear you talk of being hungry, Father," said Abelard. "You are surely too fat to feel any craving for food. Fat, you know, is the kind of intermedium through which the nutritive matter extracted from food must pass before it is assimilated to repair the loss of the individual. It thus forms a kind of magazine to supply his wants, and a fat man may abstain from food much longer than another, because during its abstinence the collected fat is rapidly reabsorbed." Father Murphy did not speak, but his look was sufficient, and his teeth clattering in his head afforded an ample commentary to the text. "You seem also cold," said the pedantic butler, "but that must be a mistake, for animal oil is universally allowed to be a bad conductor of caloric—" "The devil take your caloric!" said Father Murphy, again forgetting his holy office in his anger. "I suppose you want to persuade me that I have no feeling next?" "That is far from impossible," replied Abelard with the most provoking gravity. "For fat, by surrounding the extremities of the nose, always alleviates insubordinate sensibility. And at the same time, pray do not let me be misunderstood. I do not say that fat people can do entirely without eating, for the indivisibility and individuality of the living body can only be maintained by the incessant change of the particles which enter into its composition merely through "Hold, for heaven's sake!" groaned Father Murphy. "Part of the animal food is reduced to chyle," resumed Edward. "And, as you doubtless know, another part becomes bones. In fact, the bones are merely secretory organs encrusted by the filament of lime. The lymphatic muscles remove the salt—" "Ah!" groaned Father Murphy. "All this is very fine, but it does me not a whit less hungry. Oh, that I'd boiled rump steak at this moment, smoking hot and swimming in gravy with a lump of fresh butter." "Hark!" cried Abelard. "The vibrations in the air that strikes upon the tympanum of my ears gives imitation of the approach of some tangible object." "Alas, alas," said the priest. "It is certainly the spirit's return that carried away poor Clara. Poor dear girl. It is certainly her pocket handkerchief." "I despair of finding her," said the butler.
Despair is sinful, my son, replied the friar. Misfortunes are sent to try us, and we ought to bear them with resignation, without uttering a single murmur. But I thought you were even now complaining of being hungry, father, said Abelard with the utmost simplicity. True, true, replied the priest, with a disconcerting by his remark. But it is one thing to preach and another to praise, resumed the butler, smiling. Is it not, father? However, I certainly heard a noise, and if one finds us here, we shall be ruined. Ah, never mind that, said Father Murphy. For that we already know. Over here, cried some soldiers, who now descended into a cave, and who, as before mentioned, were particularly alert in performing their duty in examining all strangers. And it is me you're asking that, demanded Father Murphy. For if it is, it's of no matter of use, for if I were set about to telling you, it's 100 to 1 if you ever got to the bottom of it. Is it possible, cried one of the soldiers, surely my eyes deceive me, or is that the voice of Father Murphy? Sure it isn't, said the Father Murphy. And who should it be my own? Do you think that use it of another person? No, no, returned the soldier, laughing. But my astonishment was to find the owner of the voice so near me, though now I think of it, it is not surprising at all, as the Duke of Cornwall is in the palace hard by, and you of course are with him. And how can I be with him? Asked the literal Father Murphy. When I am here, now if an Irishman had such a thing, they'd have called it a bull. Oh, well, my good friend, said the soldier, we will not quarrel for words. I suppose you came down with the Duke. And if you do, you are no more mistaken in your whole life. I cannot in the least comprehend you. I don't know how you should, for I haven't begun to explain myself yet, nor should I finish if I were back to work of the day. And so, as the Duke is here, you'll just go to him, if you please. The Duke, already miserable at the loss of Clara, had no sooner heard of the escape of his daughter than he had determined to visit the place where she had been, principally from the restless desire to change which generally haunts the unhappy, and he was now much surprised as a soldier to see Father Murphy there. He felt grateful, however, to the priest as for his assiduous search for Clara, but as the adventure of the handkerchief rested entirely upon the father's conviction of his identity, the handkerchief itself having been lost in the Holy Father's unfortunate tumble in the water, the Duke considered the whole adventure as rather apocryphal. He felt, however, consoled by it, though he scarcely knew why, and returned to his friend Sir Ambrose in much better spirits than he had left him. In the meantime, the party of Elvira did not dare to leave the hut in which they had remained pent up for the whole day, their horses being crowded within its walls, as well as themselves, to prevent the possibility of discovery. At length the shades of evening began to fall, and they again set forward at a rapid pace. The agony they had suffered all day from fear of detection, the narrow pace in which they had been cooped up, together with the want of food, had exhausted the queen so much that the morning found her unable to proceed without refreshment, and about daybreak they were obliged to approach a cottage to implore assistance. The cottager and his son were out at work, but the woman of the house agreed to give the fugitives the shelter they requested. The prince, delighted at receiving this permission, flew back to the queen to lift her from her horse. But alas, Elvira was not in a state to enjoy even the most welcome tidings. Pale and livid as a corpse, her head hung upon the prince's shoulder as he bore her into the house, and her terrified friends thought she had expired. A little warm milk, however, revived her, and she opened her eyes. Okay, ads are going to hit here in a second, so I will pause here for a bit. Yeah, and I'm going to refill my water bottle. So, hang around, please.
Okay, we should be back about a full hour before the next ads. So, let's quickly get back into this.
I'm ready, quite ready to go on,
She said, gasping for utterance, and again sinking back into a fainting fit.
It is impossible that she can proceed in this state.
Said, "It is impossible that she can proceed in this state," said the prince to Clara in a whisper. "What will become of us?"
We must remain here quietly till she is better,
said Clara. "But if we should be pursued and taken—"
we cannot die better than in such a cause,
said the heroic girl. "It is strange," said the prince, looking at her earnestly, "that the queen has been able to inspire such enthusiastic devotion in such a mere boy." Clara blushed, and cast her eyes upon the ground, whilst the prince gazed upon her blushing cheeks still more earnestly, till she looked away from him abashed. He took her hand. "I cannot be mistaken," said he. It is Miss Montague." Clara's agitation betrayed her.
I must attend the queen,
said she, breaking from him, and the prince, respecting the awkwardness of her situation, forbore her to urge farther. He felt, however, completely happy. Clara was too artless to conceal the interest he had excited in her breast, and it was not the nature of man to be indifferent to the devotion of so young and lovely a creature. His eyes, however, alone expressed his happiness, and Clara, who felt his delicacy in refraining from making further observations on her disguise, found her love for him increased tenfold by his forbearance. A few hours' repose restored Elvira so much that she wished to pursue her journey immediately, and it was with the greatest difficulty that the prince persuaded her to wait until nightfall. "You must recruit your strength," said he, "or you will never be able to plead your cause with Roderick. He is too stern a hero to be won as I am."
"Oh, it is impossible to describe how I dread to meet him," cried Elvira. "I tremble at his name, being so fierce and stern as he is, will perhaps not even condescend to listen to a woman's prayer, and he will spurn me from him."
"Impossible!" cried the prince, "though I own I wish we could do without him." Whilst the principals were thus employed, the cottager's wife was endeavoring to learn from Hans who and what they were.
"That poor lady seems dreadfully tired," said she. "When she came, she looked like she was a drooping daffodil lily. When the gentleman lifted her from the horse, oh, it was quite moving to see her."
"Yeah," said Hans.
"However, though her illness should occasion a little delay," continued the cottager, "I opine that you must be unreasonable to grumble when you consider the delightful occasion it affords you of refreshing your olfactory nerves by partaking of a little of this odoriferous atmosphere."
"What, my nerves?"
"Your olfactory nerves,"
replied the learned cottager, with a look of the greatest possible contempt.
"That is, the nerves that line the membrane of your nasal organ. Every child knows that the nasal fossae are formed to receive sensations, as by the membrane, and these soft sinuses or cavities are enabled to retain a greater mass of air loaded with odoriferous matter."
Poor Hans stood aghast at this situation, which he found somewhat like that being said to Dr. Johansen when he called network a complication of concentration of rectangular angles, and afraid to speak lest he should draw himself upon a new volley of words as astounding as the last. He remained silent, staring at his companions with much the same feeling of that which a mild man in the woods just caught might be supposed to gaze upon Latin Europeans.
"Can you give me some more warm milk?"
asked Clara, who now descended in search of refreshments for the queen.
"Do you think so much of the tepid liquorious fluid good for the lady?"
said the cottager, as she put more milk into a saucepan.
She can take nothing else, returned Clara. How delightfully that girl sings,
continued she, listening to the rupture to the milkmaid, who was chanting an Italian bravura as she was milking her cow.
Yes, replied the cottager, Angelica sings well. The parietes of her larynx are in a true tense condition, and her trachea is quite cartilaginous. But here comes my good man, continued she. He has been hard at work all day on the roads, and I'm sure he must want for some refreshment.
I do indeed feel an excessive lassitude, missus, said the cottager as he came in, and I want something to eat. What have you got? Do see, will you, for it's a dreadfully hard work in breaking stones. The most we had today was a primitive limestone, but I found a few fine specimens of quartz. The crystals were quite remarkable, and I stopped at least half an hour admiring them.
Rock crystals are often found amongst quartz, said his wife, so I don't think you had any occasion to lose your time in admiring them, when, you break stones by measure, and your wife and children are starving for want of bread. Do not distress yourself upon my head, my good woman, said Clara. We have money, and our gratitude will not permit you want anything that we can give you. Thank you, cried the woman. It's a pleasure to serve a generous woman like your honor. What a charming woman! What a charming voice you have, said Clara,
turning away to avoid the woman's praises, and addressing herself to the milkmaid, who, having finished her task, now stepped over the stile that divided the garden from the cottage, with a pail of milk upon her head, and advanced gracefully in measured steps upon them.
I'm very happy to have pleased you, sir,
returned the girl, dropping her foot in the fourth position, and made an elegant curtsy, and then gracefully glided on.
Stay, said Clara. Won't you give us another song before you go? You must excuse me, sir, said the girl, again gracefully curtsying. I am exceedingly sorry to be obliged to refuse a gentleman of your appearance, but singing requires an alternate enlargement and concentration of the glottis, an elevation and depression of the larynx, an elongation of shortening of the neck, very difficult to be performed with a pail of milk upon one's head. Set down the pail, then, said Clara. Indeed I can't, sir, for I have not a moment to spare. I just met some gentlemen of my acquaintance on the hill, and as I expect them here any moment, I must snatch an instant or two to arrange my toilet. Gentlemen of your acquaintance? Cried the mother. What gentleman can you have met with here, child, that you know? My cousin John that went to a soldier some time, a party of his companions. And what brings them to these parts? No good, I fear, for John was always a wild, good-for-nothing lad. It is no evil, I assure you, mother, said Angelica pertly, but you are always fancying the worst. John has become a man of consequence now, and is the head of a party of soldiers, searching for state prisoners. He'll be made captain if he finds him, and I hope he will, with all my heart. Where are they now? Asked the mother. In the wood, replied the girl, and my brother is gone to help them in the search, and he'll get a share of the reward if they find the fugitives while he is with them. And you'd do too if you had any wit, said the wife to her husband, who had now seated himself comfortably before the fire, and seemed very unwilling to be disturbed. Inspired, however, by his wife's remonstrances, he roused himself, and stretching his heavy limbs, rolled rather than walked away. Angela was also retired, and Clara was left alone with the woman. It was already been mentioned that the presence of mind was one of Clara's distinguishing characteristics, and perceiving the danger of the queen, she was aware not a moment was to be lost. The observations of the woman to her husband, and in fact her whole manner, showed upon the variance that was her master's passion, and upon this hint Clara spoke. She offered an abundance of gold. She enlarged upon the greediness of the soldiers, who, if she waited for their approach, would perhaps cleat her of her share of the promised reward, or at least
give her such a trifle as would not be worth having, and at last drew forth a glittering medal, spread it before her eyes. Gold softens the hardest heart, and the cottager's wife could resist no longer, but promised to connive at their escape. Clara instantly ordered Hans to prepare the horses, and informing the prince and Elvira of what had passed, the whole party again set forward on their eventful journey. Chapter 31. In the meantime, Roderick had completely victorious in Spain. He had reached Madrid and established Don Pedro as king, and was now on his return to Seville, where he had left M. de Malay and his charming daughter. Edric, of course, accompanied him, but the rest of the army had marched to Cadiz to embark, the Greek page only attending upon his master. "Well, Edric," said the king, laughing as he approached Seville, "does not your heart beat with pleasure at the thought of quitting Spain?" "How can you torment me so, Roderick?" "Torment you? I thought you would be in raptures, though I must own, if you are, they are most melancholy raptures I have ever beheld in my life." "This raillery is not generous. It is unworthy of you. I own I love Mademoiselle de Mazet, but I despair." "And why?" "Alas, how am I to ask her to share the fortunes of a banished man?" "Am I not your friend?" "I know it, but I cannot brook dependence even upon you." "I do not wish you to be a dependent, but what can I do to serve you? Shall I make war upon this cross old father of yours?" "Oh, do not speak of him so lightly. Say what you please of me, but spare my father." "I respect your feelings, and as I can say no good of him, I will have the discretion to be silent." Edric felt no inclination to reply to this remark, and they travelled on in perfect silence till they reached Seville. Here they found everything changed. The town had been partially rebuilt, and the lovely groves of oranges and myrtle trees in the vicinity, glowing with all the rich luxuriance of southern spring, gave no idea of the scene of ruin and desolation it had presented. They inquired for the house of M. de Malay, and upon entering the inner square, or courtyard, they found him seated under the piazza that stretched around it, enjoying the evening breeze, whilst his fair daughter was occupied in reading to him. The fountain played in the centre of the court. Its sparkling spray descended in silvery showers, whilst innumerable orange trees and flowering shrubs, which were placed around, perfumed the air with their delicious fragrance. The light's awning, spread over the roof of the court, mellowed the light to a soft, though glowing tinge, which gave an air of voluptuous languor to the whole scene. The delight felt by M. de Malay and his daughter at again seeing their deliverers was enthusiastic, and though it was most openly expressed by the father, the burning cheeks and eyes of Pauline spoke quite as intelligibly her silent transport. "We have long expected you," said M. de Malay, "for I cannot describe how anxious we are to leave this country. Pauline has wearied heavens with the prayers for your safety, and I have felt my strength decay daily. I, too, have prayed for your return, for I have a secret to confide to you that weighs heavily upon my spirits." "To confide in us?" cried Edric. "Yes, to you," said M. de Malay. "It is true I have not known you long, but some circumstances make men better acquainted in a month than the ordinary routine of life does in years. Thus the kindness with which you have treated me, and the important events in which I have seen you engaged, have made me consider you as old and tried friends, and have induced me to confide to you a secret I have hitherto guarded with the utmost scrupulous fidelity." "What can you mean?" asked Edric in astonishment, whilst Pauline gazed upon her father with a look of the most intense anxiety.
"Pauline is not my child," said the old man impressively.
Pauline uttered a cry of agony that thrilled through the souls of her auditors, and threw herself at his feet, looking up at his face with the expression of the bitterest anguish, as though she implored him not to desert her. M. de Malay's agitation was equal to her own, and as he fondly regarded her, he continued.
Yes, the miserable being that I am not her father. Alas, often when I've beheld her enduring hunger and thirst for my sake, when I've seen her delicate frame exhausted with fatigue or shivering with cold, while still with angelic sweetness she has seemed to forget her own sufferings, and to think only of alleviating mine, oh, then how I have burned to tell her that I did not deserve her kindness, and that I was an alien from her blood.
"Oh, father, my dearest father!" cried Pauline, her eyes streaming with tears. "What do you not deserve from me? What is there that I could not do, that I could have expressed my love and gratitude? Alas, though I am not your child, the tender care you took of my infancy, your kindness, your affection—" Pauline could not continue. Her sobs impeded her utterance.
My dear child,
Said M. de Malay, and folding her in his arms, he mingled his tears with hers, whilst Roderick and Edric were both too powerfully affected to interrupt their sorrows, and stood gazing upon them in silence, though both ardently desired an explanation of this seeming mystery. After a short pause, M. de Malay resumed.
I see the astonishment I have caused you, and my heart bleeds for the pain I have been compelled to inflict upon Pauline, but I could not die in peace without disclosing this truth.
"Oh, do not talk of dying!" cried Pauline, still clinging to him with the fondest affection. "And who are the parents of Mademoiselle de Marais?" demanded Roderick.
Alas, I do not know, returned the Swiss. About 20 years ago I was travelling in England with my wife, who, afflicted with an incurable disease, had been advised to try the skill of English physicians, they being considered the most able in the world. One night, my poor wife being exhausted by fatigue, we stopped at a small inn in a village near the sea-coast. The night was tempestuous, and a blazing light in the kitchen tempted us to wait there whilst our parlour was prepared for us. A woman sat near the fire, with a lovely little girl, about 2 years old, playing at her feet. My poor wife was always passionately fond of children, though heaven had never blessed us with any, and attracted by the exquisite beauty of the little cherub, took it in her arms and began to caress it.
"Is your honor fond of children?" asked the woman with an evident affection of vulgarity. "I dote upon them," replied the wife. "Oh, Louis," continued she, addressing me in French, "if I could have such an angel as this to supply my place to you, I think I could resign to die." "If your honor's like a child, you may have her," said the woman.
I started, but recollecting that, from over the education of the lower class of England, they were all linguists, the circumstance of the woman's understanding what we said did not appear extraordinary.
"She is my child," continued the woman. "I live hard by, and only have taken shelter here from the storm. The landlady knows me very well. My husband has been dead some months now, and I find it hard to work to maintain myself with the child, too. I own I shall be glad to place her in the hands where she is sure to be taken care of."
The woman's tale seemed plausible, and my wife and I were easily induced to conclude the bargain that gave us the possession of Pauline. We visited the cottage of this woman the next morning, and found her story true, excepting that she had only lived there a few weeks. This, however, appeared immaterial, as indeed she had not fixed any definite time of the period of her residence, and which gave some reason which I had soon forgotten of leaving her former abode when her husband died. Soon after this we left England, taking Pauline with us. Her beauty increased with years, and my poor wife died, a few months after I returned to Switzerland. Pauline formed the sole consolation of my life. 2 or 3 years afterwards, a friend of mine visiting England called by my desire upon the reputed mother of Pauline. He found the cottage deserted, and the landlady of the inn told me that the woman left the place a few hours after we had left ourselves. This circumstance, combined with the evidently affected vulgarity of the woman, and the elegance of the delicacy of Pauline, was always induced me to support that I was a dupe of a deception, and that the child had been stolen from parents of a superior rank of life to that which I found her. Whether my conjectures are correct, I do not know, but when I have surveyed the beauty and graces of my child, my breast was smote with me for confining her to my own humble station, and I have determined, whenever circumstance would permit, to take her to England, and endeavour, if possible, to elucidate the mystery that hangs over her destiny.
Accompany back to Ireland, said Roderick, and when you have stayed there till you are tired, if you still wish to prosecute your researches, I will give you letters of introduction to the English court, and I sincerely hope we may find our fair friend to be a princess of blood at least. In the meantime, M. de Mailly's narrative had caused the greater agitation in the breasts of Edric and Pauline.
Not his daughter, thought the former. Whose can she be, then?
His imagination ran amongst a variety of dreams and fancies, each more extravagant than the last, for to suppose the elegant and accomplished Pauline the daughter of a mere peasant was impossible, and the transporting hope that she might yet still be his, with the confidence of his father and approbation of his friends, danced before him. Whilst Pauline, uncertain what to think, was unable to analyze her own sensations, felt even amidst the desolation in which the avowal of M. de Mailly had involved her, a faint emotion of pleasure still throbbed at her heart when she reflected now that her country was that of her lovers, and that it was possible she dared go no further, for her senses seemed unable to support the intoxicating thoughts of what might follow. It had been agreed that our friends should remain a few days in Seville, and to give the army cadets time to recover from the fatigue of their march previous to their embarkation. But the morning after their arrival, a courier arrived with dispatches from England, which made Roderick impatient to leave Spain immediately. He was at breakfast when these letters, which had been forwarded to him from Cadiz, were put into his hands. His colour changed, and starting from his seat, begged Edric to follow him to the garden.
Good God, what is the matter?
Asked M. de Mailly. Nothing, but I must return to Ireland immediately. Waving his hand as though to repel further inquiry, he left the room. Edric followed in silence.
Edric,
said the Irish monarch, throwing himself into the garden seat and burying his face in his hands.
Elvira is dethroned and perhaps murdered, all owing to my cursed folly of remaining so long in Spain.
Elvira! Exclaimed Edric, looking at his friend with the most profound amazement, for he could not imagine why he took so deep an interest in her fate. I see your astonishment, Edric, resumed the king, but I have not now time to explain the whys and wherefores. Suffice it to say that I adore Elvira, and if she perish, I will not survive her. A piercing shriek burst from the thicket as he uttered these words. Both Edric and Roderick sprang involuntarily to the spot. It was vacant, and they searched the words, but no creature was to be seen.
It was fancy, said Edric.
It was the mummy, murmured the king, come to chide me for doubting his promises for an instant.
The mummy! Cried Edric. Good God, what do you mean?
And he gazed with horror upon the wild and haggard countenance of his friend, who he seriously believed had become distracted. His look recalling the fleeting senses Roderick, with a ghastly smile, he replied,
I am not mad, though. I have enough to make so. We must return to Ireland without a moment's delay, and then reinforce my army. Elvira must be restored immediately, for her life is in danger for every moment's delay.
I hope not, said Edric, for though I detest the Rosabella, I do not think her capable of assassination. If she not be, Father Morris is, returned Roderick in a low voice, with a look of intense feeling. Edric turned pale.
In the name of God, tell me who and what you are, he said earnestly. How have you obtained this close knowledge of the English court?
I am called the devil's favourite, you know, returned Roderick, smiling in spite of his distress at his friend's embarrassment. And it would be very hard if I did not pardon to give me a hint now and then on the subjects of importance.
How can you jest upon such a topic?
Asked Edric reproachfully.
True, replied Roderick. As you say, the subject is not one to joke upon.
For we must quit Seville in a few hours, and leave M. de Mallet and the pretty Pauline to follow us under the escort of my Greek page. Or rather, what perhaps you would prefer, you should stay behind and take care of them, and Alexis and I should proceed alone?" "Oh, Roderick," exclaimed Edric, "how can you imagine how it leaves you?" "Not even for Pauline?" asked the king, smiling. "Not even for Pauline," repeated Edric firmly. "My love for you surpasses even the devoted love of woman, and whilst I breathe, neither peril nor pleasure shall tear me from your side." "My dear Edric," said Roderick, the tears glistening in his eyes. The next instant, however, he dashed them away and added gaily, "But come, we must go and make our bows, and take leave like pretty behaved cavaliers, and you must trust my discretion, Edric, that I will not tell Pauline of your want of gallantry." The Greek page looked at the image of despair when he heard the master's commands that he should remain behind, and passions, dark as the lowered heavens before a storm, hung upon his brow. He offered no opposition, however, to his master's will, and crossing his arms upon his breast, bent his head in token of obedience. The voyage of Roderick and Edric to Ireland was rapid and favorable in the extreme, and on their arrival the reception was enthusiastic. The Irish were proverbially warm-hearted, and the rapture in which they now greeted their victorious monarch defies description. Triumphal arches were erected, the walls were hung with tapestry, and the streets strewed with flowers to greet his entry into this capital. Roderick did not refuse these honors, but it was evident to all that knew him well that his mind was occupied with other things, and in fact he took his measures so promptly and decidedly that by the time his army, with M. de Mallet and his daughter, Dr. Entwerfen and the Greek page, arrived from Spain, he had assembled a force quite sufficient for the restoration of the Queen. The very day Elvira fled in terror from the power of her rival, the combined army of Roderick began its march to hasten to her assistance. It was nearly advanced the whole of the tunnel under the sea which separates the two kingdoms, without opposition. The orders were now given to the soldiers to rest for the night, and tents were rapidly pitched for that purpose. Roderick, however, could not sleep, and he stood with his arms folded, gazing at the singular scene before him. The innumerable torches fixed against the dark sides of the tunnel, shedding their lucid light around, showing distinctly the long line of white tents that stretched as far as the eye could reach, whilst the distant roaring of the sea above their heads sounded like a hoarse murmur of gathering thunder. Whilst Roderick was thus engaged, Edric perceived a group of people enter the cavern from the English side, and eagerly inquired the king. They were brought before him. They were 4 in number, but one stayed behind, holding the horses, which looked dreadfully jaded and distressed, whilst the other 3, a man and 2 women, approached and threw themselves at Roderick's feet.
"Good God, it is Elvira!"
"Henry Seymour!" screamed the Queen. He fell senseless upon the ground. In the meantime, all was anarchy in England. Disgusted with the world and with himself, the king secluded himself from society, and passed his time entirely upon the small estate adjoining the chateau of his fathers. Sir Ambrose and he often met, but they never spoke, though their hearts yearned to reach towards each other. With all his good qualities, Sir Ambrose was prejudiced and obstinate. He loved his son passionately, but he could not endure a rebel, and the poor old man was sinking fast into the grave for the want of the very consolation he would not consent to receive. Edmund was also wretched. The habits of respect in which he had been always brought up towards his father prevented his daring to intrude upon him against his will, though he would often willingly have relinquished the empty title of king and have exposed himself to all the ministries of absolute want, to have obtained the privilege of throwing himself upon his father's neck and receiving his forgiveness. The title of Edmund was, indeed, now only an empty one. Rosabella alone exercised the power of a sovereign, and her haughty temper and capricious tyranny made her universally detested. Monarchs to be respected must be firm, and whilst they continue to inspire respect, they may sometimes venture to be tyrants. But Rosabella was no longer respected. She was despised, and the commons, finding themselves oppressed and their complaints completely unattended to, began to regret the gentle sway of Elvira. "She at least," said they,
treated us with kindness, and if she did refuse our petitions, it was with gentleness. But now we are treated with scorn and trampled beneath the feet, not only of the Queen, but of her confessor. We cannot bear it. Sad and mournful was the life of the Duke of Cornwall. For days and hours he would wander the gardens of his chateau with his friend Sir Ambrose, and lament sorrowfully over the complete destruction of his hopes. In these walks they often saw Edmund, gliding at a distance like a solitary ghost, and plunging amongst the trees when he thought himself observed. "How changed Edmund has become," said the Duke. "Alas, how guilt corrodes the heart! He has destroyed my daughter, and he is now suffering the penalty of his crime." "Say not so," returned Lord Ambrose, who could not bear to hear his son blamed by anyone but himself. "If Elvira had not eloped with Prince Ferdinand—" "Eloped with Prince Ferdinand?" cried the Duke. "I do not expect that. What, can you, Sir Ambrose, join in a general voice? Will you slander poor Elvira? Elvira, whom you have known from her cradle, whom you have loved and fondled as your own child." "Patience, patience, good friend." "I have no patience. I can have no patience. When I hear my daughter scandalized, my poor motherless girl. Remember, if she were heir, lost her mother in childhood, she would have always been brought up with me, and she has been a playfellow of your son's, from the earliest infancy. Perhaps she may not be according to those rigid restraints imposed upon her sex, but those that have always secluded from the society of men. But she means well, Sir Ambrose. She means well always, and I'd answer for her virtue with my life. Besides, you know she is always used to have an intimate friend of the other sex. You know Edmund." "No one ever blamed her whilst Edmund was her friend." "No one dares blames her now. No one, I trust, whilst I have an arm and a sword ready to defend her." "My good friend, you reason like a fond father, who, though he sees is willing to excuse the faults of his offspring, your judgment condemns Elvira, even more than mine." "My good friend, you reason like a... No, no, if I thought her wrong, I should not blame her as you do. Your partiality to Edmund blinds you, and you fancy my poor child has 1,000 faults because she was not sensible to merit of your son." "You mistake me quite. My opinion of Elvira would be just the same if Edmund were not in existence, though I acknowledge frankly that every time I see his fine noble countenance worn with care, his pale cheeks and sullen eyes, I feel a pang through my inmost soul. It is a strange infatuation that you should repulse my noble boy, and yet elope so readily with a youth she scarcely knows." "Take care what you say, Lord Ambrose. Take care what you say. I will not have my child insulted."
"I do not wish to insult her. I speak but the truth. I do not even think her guilty, though the whole court rings with her shame."
"Guilt, shame, and this to me! Oh, God, I've lived too long to hear my child thus basely slandered and be unable to resent it."
"Base, and it is the conclusion of our long friendship. Base, and have I lived to call base, for merely blaspheming a coquettish wanton?"
"Wanton!"
cried the Duke. Transported by his passion, he struck Sir Ambrose violently. The aged baronet could not endure this insult, and his sword flew from his scabbard. In a second these ancient friends were engaged in mortal combat. It was a shocking thing to see these two old men, with their white hair streaming in the wind, their venerable features wrinkled with age, and their feeble frames tottering for support, fighting with all the vindictive fury of youth. How fearful is the storm of passion! How vile the human heart when left to its own workings! Every gender feeling is extinguished in the breasts of these two men, and only brutal rage remained. For some time victory was doubtful, but at last Sir Ambrose fell. In another moment his sword was his antagonist, and in another moment the sword of his antagonist would have passed through his bosom, had not a powerful arm arrested the stroke. It was Edmund. He had heard the clashing of swords at a distance, and rushing to the spot, arrived just in time to prevent the fatal blow. "Oh, my father!" cried Edmund in a throe of horror. "For God's sake, do not die until you have forgiven me!" "He hears me not," cried he, wringing his hands in unutterable anguish. "Oh, for mercy's sake, speak! Do not destroy me!" Sir Ambrose feebly opened his languid eyes.
"Farewell,"
said he, faintly.
"God bless you."
"Oh, do forgive me!" shrieked Edmund, falling upon his knees.
"I do,"
said Sir Ambrose.
"and the Duke."
The words feebly ebbed from his lips, and as he spoke, a fearful rattle of death gurgled in his throat, and with a convulsive sob, he expired. Sadly did the Duke now gaze upon his fallen foe, but when he found him dead, he was distracted. He madly tore his hair and threw himself upon the corpse, but his agonies were in vain, and the vital spark was extinct. Edmund stood also for some seconds gazing upon the body, without any distinct idea existing in his mind. When the whole in reality rushed upon him, he could not endure his own thoughts, and darted away with the velocity of lightning. The Duke heeded not his departure. He had thrown himself upon the body of his departed friend, and the whole universe seemed to contain him only with that bloody corpse.
"I've killed him! I've killed him! I've killed him!"
cried he.
"I've killed him!"
His fearful shrieks soon drew the persons to the spot.
"I've killed him!"
shrieked the Duke, in answer to all the interrogations.
"I've killed him!"
Abelard was one of the first collected around this mourning spectacle.
"What can we do?"
he said to Father Murphy.
"The case seems desperate." "I've killed him!"
Again screamed the Duke in agony.
"He is entirely mad," said Father Murphy. "There's no doubt of it."
"I've killed him!" repeated the Duke with still more piercing shriek.
"I've killed him!"
"Oh, he is mad!" cried all the spectators, while they attempted to remove him from the spot. With infinite difficulty this succeeded. He was still clinging to the corpse and screaming,
"I killed him!"
till his voice was lost in the distance. Whilst these scenes were transacting at the English court, the army of Roderick marched through the kingdom without opposition, for the people were everywhere tired of the tyranny of her rival, received Elvira with open arms, and chief nobly vied with each other in opening their houses to entertain her and her suite as she passed along. It was a fine evening in March. The night was clear, though cold, when Elvira, with hurried steps, paced the fine terrace belonging to the castle of one of these noblemen. The queen was evidently lost in reflection, and as she occasionally stopped, she threw back her long hair and looked up at the sky with an air of intense anxiety. "It is a lovely night," murmured she. "Heaven grant that peace may still attend us, yet I fear I know not what the danger. Oh, if the forces of Rosabella should resist, and Roderick should fall, and for me—" She paused, for the thought seemed too dreadful for endurance. The moon shone brightly in the heavens, and the stars sparkled like diamonds in the clear blue sky, whilst Elvira, raising her eyes to heaven, clasping her hands together, seemed lost in silent prayer. Her fair face, shaded by her long black veil, looked even more lovely than usual, in the soft light thrown upon it, and as she stood thus apparently quite absorbed in inward devotion, she seemed almost a celestial being descended upon the moment on earth, and about to remount her native skies. A figure, wrapped in a dark, long cloak, now appeared at the extremity of the terrace, and advanced slowly towards the queen. Two other figures also emerged from the shade, and followed, though at a considerable distance. Elvira was not aware of their approach until the first figure stood behind her, seizing her arms, and threw a cloak over her head to stifle her cries, and then, with the help of the others, was hurried off. At this moment Roderick sprang actively upon the terrace, and with one blow from his vigorous arm felled the first assailant to the ground. Then, drawing his sword, the enraged monarch would have instantly dispatched them, had not the supposed assassin uttered a piercing scream, and clinging to his knees implored mercy. The moon shone full on the boy's face, as disclosed to Roderick's astonished eyes the features of the dumb page. "Alexis!" he cried. The boy sprang from the ground. "Roderick!" screamed he. "Then I am ruined!" Stay, returned the king, grasping his arm and preventing his escape. Boy, what are you? Speak, or dread my vengeance. The boy's heart beat almost to suffocation, every nerve robbed from the most violent emotion. Drawing a dagger from his belt, he attempted to plunge it into the heart of Roderick. Ah! Cried the king, starting aside in time to prevent the blow. Elsewhere he could prevent it. The page had buried the weapon in his own bosom. Good God! What can this mean? The whole of the scene was passed with such rapidity that Elvira had scarcely had time to recover herself, or to be aware of what happened. The two assailants had fled the moment they perceived the king, and Elvira, with trembling steps and pallid cheeks, approached a spot where Roderick knelt beside the bleeding page. Kneeling beside him, she attempted to staunch the blood which was flowing rapidly from the wound, but in vain, for the boy's life was evidently fast ebbing. Brian, a servant of the king, who had followed his master to the terrace, aided her endeavors, but Roderick remained fixed upon the immovable, his eyes chained by the power of fascination upon the page, and now slowly unclosed his eyelids, heaving a deep sigh, fixed his languid eyes upon those of Roderick. Zoe! Cried the king. Yes, returned the page, gasping in his beak, and breathing with difficulty. Zoe, I am indeed that wretch. I loved you, Roderick. I would have died for you. I do die for you, but Elvira! What meant this outrage upon her? What did I mean? Cried Zoe, her eyes flashing fire, her whole frame supported by a supernatural beauty. Did I not see that you loved her? Could I endure to resign to another? No, concluded she, starting from the ground. I would have killed her, and had she perished, I should have died contented. The violence of the action made the blood gush in torrents from her wound, and pale and feeble, her eyes closed. She staggered a few paces, fell, gave one convulsive struggle, and Zoe was no more. Sadly did Roderick gaze upon that form which had so lately thrilled with feeling, now cold and inanimate at his feet. The victim of passion lay before him. Her hopes, her fears, her rage, and her love had passed away, and there her body remained, a senseless clod of clay, till it should be resolved into its original elements. By this time some of the servants of the castle, who had been summoned by Brian, approached, and the old Earl of Warwick, whose castle the fatal scene had taken place, rushed upon the terrace, calling wildly upon his people to save the queen. Is it the Lady Elvira that you name? Asked Brian. Oh, your face, your honour. She's safe, every inch of her. And what has been the matter? Asked the Earl. Oh, and your lordship may well ask, but the devil beats any body can tell but the one, and that's myself. You see, my master, his most gracious majesty and me were walking in the garden. That is, he was walking and I was watching, for fear any harm should happen to him. And for the life of such he isn't to be trusted a chance in a strange country. I guess he was thinking of the queen, though he never said nothing about it. And so we went near the terrace, and it was dark, and couldn't you see your hand before you? And the moon peeped through the clouds, and a pretty face looking round the glass window. And then she saw the bright light as a silver mirror, and the queen looked so pretty and stood praying that the master couldn't find it in his heart to interrupt her. And for me, I wasn't the man to be even thinking of such a thing. And then two black-looking slapings back looked to him, and stole out behind her. And there wasn't two, for three of them, never a living soul beside, to be seen respecting of being near her. But God never would suffer a real lady like herself to want a friend to comfort her when she's being mad, and my master wouldn't let her be coming after harm, for he jumped upon the terrace entirely like a hound springing at the air, and saving her, which nobody but himself could have done like it, and for the very life of him, when I came, there was a man lying dead that would have killed the princess, and it turned out it wasn't a man, but a woman. The story of Zoe is soon told. Bred in a warm climate, naturally enthusiastic in her disposition, she was a child of passion. The misfortune she had experienced in Greece, by depriving her of all her loved, had thrown her affections upon her own bosom, and they had preyed upon themselves. To give vent to the feelings that oppressed her, she created an image of perfection in her own mind, and this she worshipped in secret. When she saw Roderick, however, all was changed. A new world seemed to open upon her. The idol of her fancy, indeed, stood before her, for Roderick realized all her wildest dreams. He became her god. His heroism, his person, his talents caught her imagination, and the violence in her passions depleted the delirium of her soul. Notwithstanding, however, the intensity of her feelings, no thought of grosser texture contaminated her mind. Her love was that of angels, pure and undefiled. She regarded Roderick as a thing unshrined, almost too holy for mortal vows to worship, and she would have considered it sacrilege to dare even to think of him as a husband. With these feelings, she had watched over him with almost a mother's love, and when she informed him of the conspiracy against him, she resolved, with all the romantic self-devotion of a fond woman, to follow him unknown and in disguise, without any plan, however, of that being near him, or any hope that of the contributing to his happiness. Money, and the assistance of one or two devoted servants who contrived to follow in Roderick's train, had enabled her to accomplish this. She had felt a momentary jealousy for his anxiety for Pauline, and she had been half induced to favor the plots of the Spanish general to take Roderick prisoner. But that feeling had worn away when she discovered the mutual passion of Edric and the fair Swiss. Now the case was different, and maddened by the thought of Roderick's devotion to Elvira, she had determined to destroy her. Her trusty Greeks would have assisted her plan, but they had fled at her detection. Inexpressively shocked at what had taken place, Roderick could scarcely bear again to separate himself, even for an instant, from Elvira. "Do not bid me to leave you," he said, looking at her with the fondest of affections. "You shall accompany me, even on the field. Oh, would to heaven that you would give me the right to be near you forever!"
"Alas, alas!" replied Elvira. "I tremble for the result of this fatal contest. Oh, that I were but a humble servant, a humble peasant."
"Would to heaven you were!" cried Roderick with enthusiasm. "For, happy as I always am in your presence, never do I feel so much so as when we seem, at the present, secluded from the world. Then I could forget your rank and the artificial restraints grandeur has thrown around you, and without remembering that I am Roderick and you Elvira, think only a pair of simple lovers whose weightiest care was their attendance upon their flocks, and whose only happiness consisted of loving and being loved."
"Alas, Roderick!" replied Elvira, "do not speak of love. After the dreadful scene we have just witnessed, I tremble at the passion. No, be my friend, Roderick. Friendship is more sure than love. On that we may confidently rely. But passion destroys itself when it feeds upon it. Intense feelings cannot last."
"Oh, Elvira, say not so!" cried Roderick, fixing his eyes earnestly upon her blushing countenance, while she, trembling and agitated, betrayed by her convulsion of the passion she would have fain concealed. How feeble are words to express the transports of such a moment! 'Tis the oasis of the desert of life, and bright gem that casts a radiance upon the dress which it is surrounded. Man is born to misery. Thick clouds hang over him and obscure his path. Dangers await him at every step. One single ray alone breaks through the gloom, bright as the fairy dreams of childhood, but alas, equally fleeting. 'Tis love, pure, passionate, unsophisticated love, the only glimpse of heaven unvouchsafed on earth to man. And this was now what was felt by Roderick and Elvira, as he, throwing himself at her feet, vowed eternal constancy, and persuaded her to acknowledge that her hopes of earthly happiness centered in him alone. But why do I profane this scene by attempting to describe it? Those who have loved only have to recollect what they felt upon a similar occasion, and those who have not, well, heaven help them. Not all the eloquence of Cicero himself could give the least idea of anything of the kind. Suffice to say that before Roderick and Elvira parted, she consented, if success should crown their efforts, to become his bride. The state of England at this moment defies description. The death of Sir Ambrose and the insanity of the Duke of Cornwall were events so shocking in themselves that it was not surprising they produced a violent effect upon the minds of the people. Edmund had disappeared, and Rosabella, instigated by Father Morris and Marianne, became every more rapacious and tyrannical, whilst even they quarrelled amongst themselves, and wretchedness prevailed throughout the kingdom. This was the state of the public mind, and when the news of the invasion of Roderick first reached the ears of Rosabella,
Marianne,
exclaimed she,
summon Father Morris. We are ruined,
continued she, as the Reverend Father entered.
absolutely ruined. Roderick is invincible, and he supports Elvira. Where is Cheops?
Aye, returned Father Morris. Where is Cheops? Is that the cursed fiend that has led us on our own destruction? He counsels have destroyed us, though, for plausible in appearance, they have been deceitful in the oracles of old.
Yet you trusted him,
replied Rosabella.
I hated him from the first, but you trusted him. You ought to kill. You thought him all perfection. It flattered your vanity, and you weakly believed everything that he says.
Weakly, replied Father Morris, his lips quivering with rage.
Yes, weakly,
returned Rosabella.
For a child would have seen through his artifices, but you were deceived by them, and have been his dupe, his tool, his plaything.
This to me, cried Father Morris, gnashing his teeth together in passion.
Yes, to you,
returned Rosabella coolly.
For why should I longer conceal my sentiments? I will no longer be your slave. You have made me deserted by my husband, hated by my subjects, and detested by myself. I will therefore no longer follow your counsels. From henceforth I will act for myself. Adieu. We meet no more as friends.
And as she spoke, she walked out of the room, leaving the priest motionless with astonishment. This to me, cried he to Marianne, who, as soon as he recovered himself sufficiently to speak, to me, who sacrificed everything for her, did I not place her on the throne? Have I not sculpted it to even imbue my hands in blood for her sake? Have I not committed crimes for her weight heavily upon my soul? Did I not poison Claudia? Should I not have also destroyed Elvira, if Cheops had not saved her? Oh, Marianne, am I awake? Is it not a cruel dream? Is it possible that it can be Rosabella, my Rosabella, my child, my own Rosabella, that uses me thus? Hush, hush, cried Marianne. But 'tis a passion of a moment. Be composed. Rosabella still loves you, but irritated by the desertion of Edmund and the news she has just heard. Oh, Marianne, interrupted the friar in agony, you may easily reason, for you have never had a child. But if heaven had blessed this one, you might have felt my anguish. I do feel for you, returned Marianne, but does not she treat me with equal scorn? Since the absence of Edmund she has become distracted, and I, who know all the agonies of a woman endures when she finds herself deserted by the man she adores, can feel for her. And who first gained her? Edmund. He would not have become her husband had I not induced him. I believe not, neither would she have been queen but for you. No, no, oh, how I have toiled for that ungrateful girl! How have I adored her! You have been a devoted father. Have I not, Marianne? Have I at least endeavored to expiate my sin? I have done penance. I have spent nights unnumbered in painful vigils. I have scourged my body till the feeble flesh has shrunk beneath my torture. Yet still my mind remains unappeased. Remorse still gnaws at my vitals. Oh, Marianne, how poor is earthly grandeur to the mind of the diseased! In this manner did these companions in iniquity confer, till at length, hating each other and themselves, they gave vent to mutual upbraiding, and parted with undisguised hatred and contempt. Such indeed is the disgusting nature of sin, that a man may shut his eyes to his own defects, or rather see them through magic prism of self-love, yet he almost always abhors them when he sees them reflected in another. Thus it was with Father Morris. Marianne had been his associate in many scenes of vice. He had, in fact, first led her from the paths of virtue, and, as usual in some cases, he now hated the creature he made. Father Morris was indeed the brother of the Duke of Cornwall, whose crimes and punishments had been before slightly hinted at. He had married in early life a beautiful and accomplished woman, but instigated by the machinations of Marianne, whom he had previously seduced and abandoned, he had become jealous of her, and in a paroxysm of rage had deprived her of life. This was the crime he had since endured to expiate by the penance of his whole life. Vain, however, had been his endure. The mortification of his body avails little, where the humiliation of the spirit is wanting, and Father Morris, notwithstanding his apparent repentance, was proud, envious, and intolerant. In a fit of remorse after the death of his wife, he had embraced the monastic life, in order to subject himself to a perpetual penance, had placed himself as father confessor to Sir Ambrose. No situation, in fact, could have been more painful to a proud spirit than this, yet his daily misery Father Morris felt pride in supporting, without murmuring. It is strange, but true, that haughty spirits sometimes feel most pleasure in trying their powers of endurance to the utmost, for there is a self-satisfaction in thinking we have borne what seems almost too much for mortals, often that consoles a man under the acutest agonies. This was the case of Father Morris, and he daily tortures what he endured without shrinking, almost reconciled him to himself. Ambition, however, was still his master passion, and as his monastic vows prevented its indulgence in his own person, he devoted himself to the advancement of his child. How he succeeded and how he was rewarded has already been known. Ads are about to come on, which is a good time because that's the end of the chapter. We have one chapter left, and I really want to do it tonight. So, see you in a bit. Okay, I think since the ads are over, I hope the ads are over. We're on the final chapter. And if I'd known so many of these characters went by different names, I would try to make the voices the same. Henry Seymour being Roderick was a bit of a shock. And he was the person that Elvira wanted to marry. Which is weird. No, it's not really weird. Yeah, I caught a fiddle. Okay. I'm off center again, so let me scooch. Okay. We're gonna finish the book tonight, kids. Take all weekend to edit. Anyway. There are, let me check how many pages. We're on page 396. The last page is 407. So 11 pages. And we will close the book on the mummy. Literally. So. Chapter 32. Have you heard the news? Asked Lord Maysworth one morning, while bustling into the breakfast room of Lord Gustavus de Montfort. What is it? Demanded the noble lord, who was sitting at breakfast with his usual satellites. The King of Ireland has arrived at Oxford with an immense army intending to re-establish Elvira. Impossible! Impossible! Echoed the satellites. Something must be done, said Lord Maysworth. Thinking as I think, as I am confident everyone who hears me must think, or at least ought to think, said Lord Gustavus. No government can be worse than the one we have at present. The Queen has not performed one of her promises, groans Dr. Hardman, and her caprice and cruelty are beyond endurance. Her extravagance is unbounded, said Lord Maysworth. And her arrogance extreme, rejoined Lord Gustavus. The satellites shook their heads in chorus. In my opinion, said Lord Maysworth, we had better seek Elvira and try to proprietate her. She was used to the mild and gentle. But will she not be too exasperated with our former desertion to listen to us? Asked Dr. Hardman. I think not, said Lord Gustavus pompously. The result of this conference may be easily imagined. Rosabella found herself deserted, many of who had not the courage to abandon her cause had they not found precedents for their conduct, and fled in suite of the rebel lords. Roderick rapidly advanced, and his army was every day augmented by the discontented English. I'm lost, Marianne, cried the Queen when she found it empty. When she found the enemy was within a day's march of her capital. I'm ruined beyond redemption. Do not desert yourself, said Marianne, and you may yet be saved. If you despair, it is a virtual acknowledgment of the weakness of your cause. What will become of me? Continued Rosabella, wringing her hands. No earthly help can save me. But courage may, said the deep voice of Cheops, who had entered the room unobserved. Ah! Screamed Rosabella. It is a fiend! Cheops laughed, and an unearthly sound rang hoarsely in the ears of his auditors. Speak, demon, or whatever thou art, cried Marianne. Shall we perish? You shall meet with your reward, said the mummy calmly. Are you satisfied? Oh, Rosabella! Screamed Father Morris, rushing into the room in an agony of despair. Save her! Save my child!
Your child?
Cried Rosabella.
Can it be possible that you are my father?
I am, but fly, fly! And I forgive everything. Let us only fly!
Alas,
cried Marianne.
he has but too much reason for his agony. The enemy have entered the city.
What will become of us? Ejaculated the friar. Fiend! Monster! Barbarian! Cried he, addressing Chops, seizing him roughly by the arm. Deliver us! It was I, cursed counsels, which involved us in the ruin! Save us! My counsels that led you to ruin? Returned Chops with one of his bitter laughs. Say rather your own passions. Did I urge you to murder Claudia? Nay, did I not save Elvira? Did I not warn you that the throne and misery were inseparably connected? And have not all my promises been fulfilled to the very letter? Yes, to the letter, returned Father Morse, but not in spirit. By the sacred hawks of Osiris kept at Edfu, I swore Rosabella would be queen, and you her favourite minister. Talk not of what is past, cried the priest impatiently. Tell me how to act. The foe is at the gates of the palace. Did you not say there was a secret passage leading from this chamber? There is, cried Father Morris with rapture. We will there lie concealed, and may surprise them. Cheops laughed. Am I still your foe? He asked with his usual bitterness. Name it not, cried Father Morris. We have not an instant to lose. Hurry to the subterranean passage. I hear the horses of the enemy in the court of the palace. Thebes was perforated with passages, yet she is fallen, muttered Cheops, and he followed the friar and Rosabella through the opening into the secret chamber. Marianne joined them, and the spring panel closed. Nothing could be more flattering than the reception Elvira met from her people. Roderick had placed her at the head of his army, and the people hailed her appearance with rapture. Not a blow had been struck, for the army of Rosabella had joined her banners, and Elvira advanced to London without opposition. Too mild and forgiving to indulge a single feeling of revenge, she felt rejoiced that her rival had escaped, and wished no pursuit to be insinuated. Edric, however, was not so quiescent. 1,000 circumstances flashed upon his mind to prove that the creation of Rosabella had long been planned by Father Morris, and he felt convinced that he had been a dupe of the plans they had laid to induce him to quit the kingdom. I will find him, he said, and expose his infamy. He shall not escape me thus. Vain, however, was his search, and he returned to the room so lately occupied by Rosabella, restless and dispirited. Elvira was now in the splendid chamber, surrounded by her friends, and trembling with agitation, was awaiting the expected arrival of her father. Oh, heavens! exclaimed she, as the poor old man was led in. Roderick, my beloved Roderick! Can we save him? Alas, returned Roderick, I fear, but compose yourself, my dearest girl. All may not yet go well. Where is Elvira, my child, my darling Elvira? Cried the man. I did not kill her, no, whispered he, drawing near to Roderick. I killed him, it is true, but it was for her sake. He slandered my child. I could not bear it. Oh, God, cried Elvira. Have mercy upon him. It breaks my heart to see him thus. Leave us, I implore you, she continued, addressing her friends. I cannot bear that even you should see the excellence of his melody. Leave him with me, and perhaps my presence may recall his last recollection. Finding opposition only increased her anxiety, her friends at length consented, and Elvira was left alone with her father. Kneeling by his side as he lay stretched upon the sofa, the queen endeavored to console him, but he knew her not, and wrung her heart by calling her vehemently upon Elvira. "If I could see my child," he said, "I could die contented. Call my child. Where is Elvira? Yes, yes, I know she is queen and cannot come to me. Yet I think even a queen might look at her poor old father. I only want her to look at me." Whilst this scene was passing, Rosabella and her friends lay concealed in the secret chamber, and though the movable panel watched everything that passed. "Now is the time," cried Father Morris, when he saw that Elvira, exhausted by her grief, had hidden her face in her hands to indulge her tears unrestrained. "You ensure your own destruction if you kill her," said Cheops. "I care not," returned Father Morris, and removing the panel he approached. Elvira saw him not, and the shining dagger already was aimed at her breast, when it caught the eye of the maniac, and returning reason flashed through his mind. "Edgar!" he cried, with a piercing scream. "Spare my child!" The cry aroused the friends of Elvira, who had remained in the antechamber, and they rushed in. In an instant the room was crowded. Father Morris was secured, and his confederates, from his having left the panel open, were discovered. "Edgar!" cried the Duke. "Yes, it is Edgar, my brother, my only brother. This is Elvira. She has not fled. I knew she is not. She is safe." "And is it possible," cried Edric, "that you are the Duke Edgar?" "I am that wretch," said Father Morris. "Then Rosabella is my child, and for her I've become a wretch. I am. Yet to her I have done my duty, and if she is spared—" "Ah!" cried M. de Mallet. It is. Yet I am not deceived. That is the woman who sold us Pauline." "Who? Which?" exclaimed Edric. "There!" cried the Swiss, pointing to Marianne. "Marianne!" exclaimed Edric. "Yes, yes," said she. "Marianne! He is right. It is I, and now is the moment of my vengeance. Seduced and deserted by this man," pointing at Father Morris. "My passions, all in its impetuous, panted my revenge. I instigated him to murder the wife for whom he had abandoned me. I stole his child and sold her to a stranger, and I substituted my own." Wretched offspring, whom I had by a man I abhorred in his place." "What?" cried Father Morris, his livid lips quivering with anguish. "Is Rosabella not my child?" "No," cried Marianne. 20 years ago I sold your child to this gentleman," pointing to M. de Mallet. "He is a foreigner, and I believed by placing her in his hands you would never see her more." "Then who is my Rosabella?" "My child, by your servant Jacques." "Curses on thee, woman! What, have I destroyed myself here and hereafter the offspring of that wretch? A man I detested, abhorred, despised." "Yes," said Marianne, with a fiendish laugh. "You abandoned me, and I swore to be revenged. He heard my oath, and by promising to assist me, obtained my consent to be his paramour. By his aid I effected all the rest. He has long been dead, but I still pursued my plan, and when I saw you risking body and soul for Rosabella, I gloried, for I have been revenged." "Fiend!" cried the priest, and rushed upon her before anyone could prevent him, and stabbed her to the heart, and then instantly withdrawing the dagger, buried it in his own bosom. "Still I am revenged." As heaving a deep sigh, she expired. Father Morris never spoke again. My tale is nearly closed, for dull must be the mind that cannot picture all the rest. The Duke recovered his reason and enjoyed all the happiness his bosom was yet capable of, in witnessing the union of his daughter to Roderick, who he had loved as Henry Seymour, and now adored as a hero of Ireland. He gave Pauline a noble fortune as his niece, and she married Edric, who, in the absence of his brother, took possession of his father's wealth, and fixed his residence in his former dwelling, where, after all his troubles, Dr. Entwerfen found himself comfortably re-established in his ancient chamber, whilst Clara, becoming the bride of Prince Ferdinand, enchanted her mother and secured her own happiness. The coronation of Roderick and Elvira as King and Queen of the United Kingdoms of Great Britain and Ireland was superb, as far as excelled in that which Elvira had previously been an actress. Taught wisdom by experience, however, she no longer placed implicit reliance upon the shouts of applause that followed her footsteps. Yet, even with the reflection that all the promises she received might be evanescence, she could not resist the emotion of pleasure that swelled in her breast when, after the priest had pronounced the nuptial benediction, she walked with Roderick, the chosen of her heart, through a long line of kneeling subjects, and heard every mouth implore blessings on their heads and bestow praises of her choice. Proudly did Elvira look around as she reached the entrance of Westminster Hall, yet ere she entered it, a rustle and bustle in the crowd attracted her attention, and a man, clad like a monk, threw himself before her. Elvira screamed when the man, throwing back his cowl, fixed his heavy eyes upon her and exclaimed, "Do you not know me, Elvira? It was Edmund." "Alas, alas!" cried he. "The demon was right. I trusted my own strength, and I have fallen, miserably fallen, though I knew not that my ambition was my God. Everything else weighed lightly on scale. Yet even when my ambition was gratified, I was wretched, for I loved you, Elvira, even whilst I plotted against you. And as my own heart reproached me, I felt every wrong you suffered more poignantly than you could yourself. My poor father, too, is all over now, and I am doomed to bitter expiation of your sins. Bitter indeed, for how far beyond all other sufferings are the never-dying tortures of remorse. One thought alone haunted my mind, one image alone floated before my senses. I could not die till I had obtained your pardon. Pardon me, then, Elvira. See, thus humbly at thy feet I implore thy forgiveness, crouching in the dust and bending my neck to be thy footstool." "Rise, I entreat you, rise," said Elvira. "Be assured I forgive you, nay, that I pity you from my inmost soul." "She pities me," cried Edmund. "Yet I can bear even this, even pity. I am indeed fallen so low as to be pitied. Yes, yes, I am indeed to be pitied." "I do not mean to wound your feelings," returned Elvira. "Believe me, Edmund, tell me, what is there I can do for you?" "Nothing," he cried. "The world is nothing for me now. Pity that unhappy woman that was my wife. As for me, forget me." "Never," cried Elvira, "for never can I forget your disinterested love and your devoted attention. My heart, however, is capricious, and mine, though sensible to your merits, was destined for another." "And well does that other deserve your love, for even jealousy itself must own that Roderick is worthy to be your husband. Yes, to him I can resign you. Farewell, Elvira, you shall never see me more. Let my brother take my inheritance. May you be happy. God bless you. God bless you." And starting from his knees, he disappeared before she could reply. The spirits of Elvira were agitated by this event, which threw a damp over the remaining festivities of the day, and trembling and unnerved, she proceeded to the magnificent hall, where a sumptuous banquet was prepared for her reception. For some days after the event, the attention of Roderick and Elvira was occupied in arranging the different affairs of the kingdom, whilst Edric and Pauline, with the old Duke of Cornwall and the Malay and Father Murphy, retired to the house in the former country, where Dr. Entwerfen was already comfortably established. A thousand emotions swelled in the heart of Edric as he approached this venerable mansion, and saw again its well-known turrets peeping through the trees. Strange indeed are the feelings that oppress the mind when the wanderer returns after a long absence to the habitation of his forefathers. A mingled crowd of contrary sensations, of disappointed hopes, of undefined fears float through his fancy, and as well-remembered objects recall the visions that formerly delighted him, he starts at the difference the experience of their fallacy has made in himself, and he sighs in vain for a return of the blissful ignorance he formerly despised. All, too, appears changed. As the human mind judges only by comparison, the eyes become dazzled by distant splendors, and that which to the eyes of youth had appeared superb seems to the mature judgment of manhood tame, vapid, and insipid, whilst the imagination which had fondly cherished the favorite dreams of childhood and decked them with the vivid colors of fancy, feels disappointed and disgusted, though it scarce knows why, to find the reality so different from the image it had pictured to itself. Such were the feelings of Edric as he entered the grand hall of this residence of his ancestors, and gazed upon the well-remembered faces of the crowd of servants assembled to meet him. At the head of these was Davis, his tall, thin figure waving to and fro, and his long, thin white hair floating upon his shoulders, and the more spruce and gallant aspects of Abelard and his devoted Eloisa, and the late Mrs. Russell, who had blessed him with the possession of her fair hand a few days before, and now stood blushing and simpering, with all the affected modesty of a bride in 60, to receive the congratulations of those around her. "Welcome, welcome, my dear Edric!" cried Dr. Entwerfen, rushing down the stairs to meet him, his sleeves tucked up and his wig thrown back, in a very experimental philosophic manner. "Rejoice with me, too, for I have recovered my balloon, my darling casset bottles of flamity, my morning snuff, and, more than all, my adorned galvanic battery. Yes, my compendium of science, my epitome of talent, and my most inestimable treasure is safe. Not, indeed, that which was employed in galvanizing the mummy, but its counterpart, its duplicate, its prototype. The mummy came to England, and the balloon being recognized to be mine, was placed in my apartment, where it has remained ever since, stowed up in safe but in glorious obscurity, till my return." "Oh, that's a clear case," said Father Murphy, "and there's no doubt of it." Leaving the delighted doctor to show the treasures of his laboratory to M. de Mallet, Edric retired to his chamber, and after surveying again and again the well-known objects it contained, he hurried to his favorite grove. It's singular how inanimate objects, which have been long unseen, recall the thoughts and train of feelings indulged in one that last beheld them. Thus the house, the groves, the walks, the gardens, and the river recalled all its former longings to Edric's mind, and he again burnt to conceive with the disembodied spirit, as he entered the grove where he had formerly so often ruminated, and indulged dreams wild and improbable as the delusions of delirium. The day was beautiful. It was one of those bright, glowing mornings in April, when dewdrops hang upon every thorn, and when the sun shines brightly through the clear, pure air, and all nature seems awakening to new life and vigor of repose. Edric entered the grove and threw himself upon the very bank where he had reclined only a few months before under such different feelings. The river, the grove, the bank were all the same. He only was changed. "And yet," he said, "is not my mind still as unsettled as before? Am I not still wandering the labyrinth of doubt, unknowing where to turn, and yet tormented with a restless desire to discover my way? What can have become of the mummy, though I strangely resuscitated? It is strange. Since the restoration of Elvira, it seems to have vanished, and yet all here speak of it as if a living, animated being. Would that I could see it. Oh, Cheops! Cheops!" Suddenly a strange, unearthly voice seemed to murmur harshly in his ear. "Go to the pyramid. There and only there can thy hopes be gratified." Edric started upon his feet, and no one was near him. Not a sound broke the awful stillness that reigned around. save a gentle rippling of the river that flowed at his feet. He gazed wildly on every side, hoping, yet fearing to behold the ghastly being. He fancied his words had conjured up. It was in vain. No dark figure imposed himself between him and the clear, bright sunlight. No gloomy shadows stretched along the plain. All looked gay as youth and happiness, yet still that awful voice rang in his ears and thrilled through every nerve. "I will go to the pyramid," he cried energetically. "I will enter that horrid tomb, but I will go alone." In pursuance of the sudden but irresistible desire, Edric hastily returned to Egypt, and found that he was called to London by business of importance. To satisfy the enormous curiosity of Pauline, he departed. Indescribable emotions throbbed in his bosom as he took his seat in the stage balloon which was to convey him to Egypt. But when he saw the towers and temples, and all above, the pyramids of this mysterious country lying at his feet, his agitation increased almost to agony. It was with infinite difficulty that he obtained permission again to visit the objects of his journey, as, since the mysterious disappearance of the mummy, the tomb of Cheops had been closed from mortal eyes. The interference of the British consul, however, at length alleviated all objections, and Edric, whose impatience had become absolute torture from the delay, once more entered that awful receptacle of fallen greatness. Scarcely a twelvemonth had elapsed since he had last trodden those solemn vaults, yet what a change had taken place in his destiny! When he considered the number and variety of events that had befallen him, he could scarcely fancy it possible that they could be crowded into so short a space of time, and instead of a year, centuries seemed to have rolled over in his head. His feeling of personal identity seemed confused, his senses became bewildered, and he mechanically followed his conductor almost without knowing whither he was going. At last the guide stopped. "This is the tomb of Cheops," he said. "I suppose, sir, you will enter it alone." Edric started. The words of the guide seemed to ring in his ears as the knell of death, and he shuddered as the thought crossed his mind that some horrid and appalling punishment might even now await him for his presumption. Desperately, he snatched the torch from the hands of his guide and advanced alone. Darkly did those gloomy vaults seem to frown at his approach, and fearfully did his footsteps resound as he slowly penetrated their deep recesses. At length he reached the tomb, but its brazen gates were closed, and he attempted in vain to open them. He placed the torch upon the ground, and again tried to unclose the fatal portal. He exerted his whole strength, but still it resisted his efforts. Rendered desperate, he threw himself against the gates with utmost superhuman force. Suddenly a hollow sound murmured through the caverns, and a current of wind rushed by with a mighty and resistless fury. The brazen gates flew open with a fearful clang, and the torch fell and was extinguished. The next moment the sculptural lamp shot forth a faint gleaming light, which brightened to degrees into a steady flame. Most heavenly music sounded upon the ear, dying gradually away from murmurs, soft as an Ethiopian harp. The brilliant light of the lamp now glowed with noonday brilliance and showed distinctly every corner of the fatal chamber. Edric looked timidly around and shuddered as well-remembered object met his eyes. But what was his horror and surprise when, glancing at the marble sarcophagus of Cheops, he beheld the gigantic figure of the mummy standing erect beside it. It was again simply wrapped in the garments of the tomb, and its glassy eyes and rigid features and statue-like form chilled Edric to the heart. He looked at it a few moments in silence, till it raised its arm and seemed to address him. When shrinking back with indescribable horror, he uttered a faint shriek and hid his face in his hands. "Why dost thou tremble?" asked the mummy in his deep, hollow voice that thrilled through Edric's very soul. "Didst thou not come here to seek me, and dost thou shudder to behold my form? I am now before thee. Ask what thou wilt. I will promptly reply. Why art thou silent? Why does thy heart seem to wither in my presence? Alas, alas, is no mortal to be found free from my devising influence of fear. Thou art called bold, courageous, and noble. Thou hast dared to soar above thy fellow men. Thou hast ardently wished to see me. Behold, I am here, and now, weak, fearful, and inconsistent as thou art, thou shunnest my approach.
I do not shun thee, said Eric, removing his hands, and endeavoring to look calmly on the fearful thing before him, though the flesh seemed to quiver on his bones with the effort. I do not shun thee, but the nerves will shrink through my mind be firm. I did wish to see thee, for ardently do I wish to desire to know the secrets of the tomb. Cheops burst into one of his fearful laughs.
Weak, silly worm, are you not satisfied then? How would this knowledge avail you? Has anything but misery attended your former researches? And can anything but misery attend to the knowledge you now covet? Learn wisdom by experience. Seek not to pry into secrets denied to man. If you wish still, however, to be resolved of your doubts, behold me ready to satisfy them. But I warn you, wretchedness will wait upon my words.
Then I no longer seek to hear them, for even weak as you esteem me, I can learn wisdom from experience. Thus then, I tear the tormenting doubts that I have long haunted me from my mind and bid them farewell forever.
It is well,
said Cheops, his eyes beaming with joy.
Then my task is accomplished. I have found at last a man, a reasonable man. I honor you, for you can command yourself. And now you may command me.
I do not wish it, said Edric.
Have you no curiosity?
Asked the mummy with a ghastly smile. No, returned Edric, unless it be that I would fain know your history and the meaning of the sculptures on your tomb.
What are they?
Demanded Cheops. A youthful warrior is bearing off a beautiful woman in his arms, whilst an old man laments bitterly in the distance.
I was the warrior, said Cheops, and the beautiful female was Arsinoe. I loved her, and to gratify my impetuous passion, I tore her from the arms of her father by force.
The warriors afterwards contending with the old man who falls beneath his blows.
He did, cried Cheops. He died by my hand, and eternal misery haunts me for the deed.
And this old man was
my father,
cried the mummy, writhing in agony. And Arsinoe,
my sister, my own beloved sister.
A solemn pause followed his speech, for Edric was too much shocked to speak again to the awful being who had avowed such crimes, and upon whose face were traced passions too horrible to be imagined. After a short silence, Cheops again exclaimed,
Yes, yes, I see your horror, and it is just. But think you that I do not suffer? Know that a fiend, a wild, never-dying fiend, rages here,
continued he, pressing his hand upon his breast.
It gnaws my vitals, it burns with unquenchable fire, never-ceasing torment. permitted for a time to revisit Earth, I've made use of the powers entrusted to me to assist the good and punish the malevolent. Under pretense of aiding them, I gave them counsels which only plunged them yet deeper in destruction. Whilst the evil that my advice appeared to bring upon the good was only like a passing cloud before the sun. It gave luster to the success that followed. My task is now finished. Be happy, Edric, for happiness is in your power. Be wise, for wisdom may be obtained by reflection. And be merciful, for unless we give, how can we expect mercy? Rely not on your own strength. Seek not to pry into mysteries designed to be concealed from men, and enjoy with comforts within your reach. For know that knowledge above the sphere of man's capacity produces only wretchedness, and that to be contented with our station and to make ourselves useful to our fellow creatures is the only true path to happiness. The mummy ceased to speak, and his features, which had appeared wild and animated during his conversation with Edric, became fixed, and an earthly lustre had flashed from his eyes, faded away, and gave place to glossy deadness. His limbs became rigid, and as the light of the lamp gradually sunk into distinctness, the ghastly form of the mummy seemed rapidly changing into stone. Edric felt that for a moment, when it was possible for him to hold communion with the strange being, was rapidly passing away, and almost shrieked as he exclaimed, "One question! One more ere it be too late!" The mummy feebly raised his languid eyelids, but Edric felt his blood freeze at their natural glare. With a violent effort, however, he roused himself to speak. "Was it a human power that dragged you from your tomb?" "The power that gave me life could alone restore it," replied the mummy in slow, measured accents, as it sank gradually back into its former tomb. Edric shuddered, and involuntarily rushed forward, but the mummy no longer lived or breathed. Cold, pale, and inanimate it lay, as though its sleep of 2,000 years had never been broken. Oblivion laid him down upon his hearse, and no mortal evermore could boast of holding converse with the mummy. The end. And so ends the mummy. If anyone is here, please flash them out or something so I know you're here. As I'm uncertain if we should raid out or not. Just me. Now I would have to see who's still here to raid. Because it is after midnight for me. Whew. Nevermore can mortal man speak to the mummy. Oh, now the music starts. Ugh.
Oh, I don't see any other readers on. And I'm tired. So, if anyone is still here, the mouse is taking up too much room. Pick your message. And I will see you for Fairy Tales tomorrow. And for, I guess, part 2 of my affiliate anniversary. Again, thank you all for coming in. And have a good night. Yep, wrong one.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist. Lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breathes a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book.